may reserve 2 minutes at the end as a rebuttal. We ask that the public keep their comments to 2 minutes unless they are representing an organization or group, and they may have 5 minutes. And Sean Alexander here is the official timekeeper, so he'll keep everybody on. Appeals. Pursuant to the provision of Section 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, notice is hereby given that a final hearing before this commission is appealable to the Chancery Court of Davidson County or the Circuit Court of Davidson County via a statutory writ of certiorari. You're advised to seek your own independent legal counsel and to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements are met. You should also seek independent legal advice regarding the applicability of the writ of certiorari to the specific decision of the Historic Commission. First things we'll listen to are the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be voted at a single time. No individual public hearing will be held, nor will the commission debate these items unless a member of the audience or the commission requests that the item be removed from the agenda. We do have one that has been removed from the agenda already. It's Rosa Parks, and unless there's others, we'll get started.
I got it.
I'll just hand it
All right.
over.
Yeah, we're computer's in a different spot, so we'll give this a shot. I believe there are 19, actually with the one removed, there are 18 items on the consent agenda. 2104 Grantland Avenue, it's an application for demolish an outbuilding and construct a new outbuilding with reduced setbacks. 2004 Linden, just demolish a principal building and outbuilding and infill in its place. 4th Avenue North and Van Buren, new construction of infill. 1400 Linden Avenue, new construction, outbuilding with setback determination. 1703 Beechwood Avenue, new construction of an addition. 815 Fatherland Street, that's new construction infill. 2400 Barton Avenue, new construction outbuilding with setback determination. Rosa Parks has been removed from consent. 210 Mockingbird Road is new construction with infill and outbuilding. 1235 5th Avenue North is demolition of an outbuilding and new construction of infill. 1800 Holly Street is new construction of an outbuilding and then conversion to an accessory dwelling unit, detached accessory dwelling unit. 1408 Elmwood Avenue is construct an outbuilding with setback determination. 302 Manchester Avenue, new construction of a detached accessory dwelling unit. 2800 Oakland Avenue is new construction of an addition. 1702 Fatherland Street is also new construction addition. 105 South 11th Street is demolish primary building and replace with sorry about that. 224 Lauderdale Road, new construction infill. 744 Roycroft Place is new construction infill. And finally, 1605 Forest Avenue is new construction infill. Staff has reviewed these cases, find that they meet their respective design guidelines, and recommends approval of them. Some of them have conditions, but the applicants have agreed to those conditions. Unless any items need to be
Thank you,
pulled
Sean.
today.
Are there any cases that were listed in the consent agenda that anyone in the public requests that they be removed for and be heard before the commission? Okay, seeing none, I close public hearing. Motion to approve the consent agenda or questions to Sean?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second. Mr. Speaker, I apologize for my tardiness. I'll recuse myself from the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you there, Commissioner G. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. And we will start off with 1320 Rosa Parks Boulevard.
This application is for mixed-use retail and residential development. The building will be 4 stories with retail space facing Rosa Parks. The Metropolitan Development and Housing Authority reviewed this recently, and they've approved the project. Commissioners expressed concern to staff in regards to vehicular access and orientation, so we thought it'd be worthwhile to have a discussion and pull it from the consent agenda. The project meets the design guidelines in terms of site, building, planning, parking areas, height, scale, massing, and facade articulation. So I'll just use this presentation time to talk about those two issues that were brought up. The project includes a vehicular entrance to interior parking, which is not ideal in terms of meeting the design guidelines requirement for walkability and driveways, but it is the only way to access that multi-level parking area. The other level of it is accessed from the alley, as it should be. The entrance is mitigated by a storefront that wraps around to the side facing the vehicular entrance, but there may be more that could be done to, without a lot of expense and redesign, to kind of mitigate that wide opening. The building is oriented with the primary entrances for its retail space towards the street as required by the guidelines. However, the residential portion will be accessed from the interior of the parking area. It may be that the project can meet the design guidelines better for orientation with some type of primary entrance for the residential portion that's closer to the street. So staff's recommendation from the report that you have is a recommendation for approval with the conditions that staff approve a brick sample, an assurance that the double windows have a 4 to 6 inch mullion between them, and that staff review proposed exterior lighting and location of trash containers. And of course, they would apply separately if signage is needed. But again, there may be some additional conditions you could offer the applicant for meeting those guidelines for orientation, walkability, and driveways. And the applicant's here if you have any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Robin at this time? Okay, go ahead.
I guess this project has passed all of planning's wants and needs.
I'm not sure about that, but I do know it's passed through MDHA.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Open public hearing. If anyone would like to speak against this project, if you would come to the, oh, I'm sorry. First, I should open up for the applicant. If the applicant would like to come and speak regarding this project, please come.
Hi, my name's John Barnett. I'm the architect of the project. I'm with the firm B3 Studio in Brentwood. I guess I'm here to answer any questions you might have or any concerns, anything that we can do to get the project approved and get it recommended and approved. So, does anyone have any questions or anything that I can assist with?
I don't think so at this time.
Okay.
There is a chance for rebuttal later, so
Okay.
we'll keep you posted.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think Robin. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Now I open public hearing. If anyone would like to speak against this project, would you please come to the microphone first? Okay, seeing none, are there any that would like to speak for this project? Okay, thank you. Close public hearing. Discussion?
Robin, have we approved anything like this that didn't have an entrance to the residential from the front before?
Not to my knowledge. Even with multifamily where there are buildings behind other buildings, we've required some sort of walkway or something that helps those rear buildings be oriented to the street. And this one, the only real way to get to it would be to walk down that vehicular ramp to get into the parking garage.
You've all had discussion with the developer and the architect, and
I have to say, not specifically about that, because it was a commissioner who brought up those concerns. I did let them know that that was going to be a concern today, but we did not talk about any specific solutions.
okay.
So, Robin, just to clarify, could you state again what the concern was that one of the commissioners raised?
There's two primary concerns. One is that wide opening for the in and out for vehicular access to the garage.
From Rosa Parks.
From Rosa Parks. And if it could be accessed from the alley, of course they would do that. But since it's a multi-level garage and the grade changes, the lot's just not big enough to get enough access to a vehicle to access that upper level from the alley. So there is no choice but to have that. So then the hope was, well, maybe there are other ways to kind of mitigate that. Maybe it's a post in the middle, maybe it's framing it out in a different way, but some way to kind of mitigate that when you're walking down the street, you're faced with this huge opening that's just to a parking garage. And the other one was orientation, that the residential portion of the project doesn't have any kind of orientation to the street. You have to walk down that vehicular ramp into the garage to access the residential.
So that's also how residents would access the street, the sidewalk, the retail would be through the garage.
Robin, clear, this photo or drawing we're seeing now, that is facing Rosa L, correct?
That's correct.
Orientation.
Yes, that's correct.
You know, that street is really, really busy. So when you have ingress, egress from, that's concerning for the neighborhood as well. Lots of people walk on that sidewalk, so how far from the curb would this be? Right on the curb?
No, they have a little plaza area between the sidewalk and the building, probably for restaurant seating or something like that, but there is a plaza area, so it does give a little bit of relief for that building. And then the residential section, of course, is set back even further from that commercial front, which gives them a little more relief from a busy street. The concern was just that orientation. Have there be some way to access the residential section without having to walk down what's really for vehicles into a parking garage.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes, but still.
I just have a couple of questions for the applicant. So do I understand correctly that the entrance off of Rosa Parks into the parking area is the only access for those few spaces on the lowest level? In other words, that lower level of parking doesn't connect to the garage above?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's due to the size of the lot, the grade changes, and so on. And so I assume that parking is intended for primarily prospective tenants who are going to the leasing office there at the ground floor and retail parking.
That's correct.
And there's only, it looks like, maybe 10 or 12 spaces down there. So from a traffic volume perspective, I'm not sure everyone understood, I guess, that all the parking above for the residential doesn't want egress they can't egress.
Right, they'll use the lower level garage that's accessed off the alley.
It's below, not above, right?
Correct.
And so all the residential traffic would be egressing from into the alley.
That's correct.
Okay. So it's a minimal, impact. There's also a median out there, so it's only right in and right out allowed.
That's correct.
Currently. And then the driveway that's coming in, is that a minimum width?
It is. The drive aisle is currently drawn at 24 feet.
Okay.
And then we have the sidewalk just to the right of that the tenants would use, obviously separated by a railing. And I understand the concern about that, about the orientation, but it's just kind of a product of how the building was laid out with the center core where the elevator is. It's just back into the building. It's back away from the street in the center of the building. So obviously, from the street, you would have to walk back into the building and then take that elevator up along that path.
Thank you.
Any more discussion or questions for the applicant while he's up here? Thanks. Do you have a motion?
Well, I think the question of whether residents can enter the building from the street, from an urban design perspective, I think that, would be desirable, obviously. Not sure there's anything in our guidelines necessarily that specifically state that all uses within the structure need to have an entrance from the street. Is there anything to that effect?
It just talks about the orientation, but no, it doesn't say every single use.
Okay.
In other projects, that's been accomplished with multiple entrances on the front or with walkways leading back.
Right. I think it's may not be the way any of us would design it necessarily without being able to get to, the street from the residential without walking down the garage entrance. But I think given that our design guidelines don't really address that, and given the constraints of the site, it seems like they've been able to do everything they can. I mean, one thing that's, I think, impressive about this is, they've put retail here in a location that's could very well be challenging from a retail perspective. I think there is on-street parking along here, which is good, and but they do need that parking right behind the retail and easy access to it to make it viable. So I don't see much of I don't really see it as much of an option to try to access the retail parking from the alley, since it's a mid-block on what I think is a pretty long block. So those would be my thoughts.
I concur with pretty much that as well. I feel like just the way it is, I mean, maybe there could be a different way, but based on our guidelines, I feel like it meets it. There could have been some things that, like you said, if it wasn't quite as wide, but, I think it meets the guidelines.
Yeah. And I think Public Works requires a 24-foot entrance, so they've really minimized the width of the driveway, and then whether or not you had a primary entrance to the residential, you still probably would want 5 or 6 feet on either side to be able to, so a person can walk out from the parking to the retail. So unless there's any other comments, I'll move that we approve staff recommendation.
Okay. Do I have a second? Okay. Any more discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. The next order is 1721 Fifth Avenue North.
On November 20th, the commission approved a duplex for this site, which is under construction, as you can see from this image. The inspector noticed that the siding used has a 7-inch reveal rather than the 5-inch reveal required on the permit, and that was both on the text portion of the permit and the drawings of the permit, and is required in the design guidelines. The applicant requests to retain the existing siding. In all other cases where this has happened, applicants have been required to remove all the siding to meet the permit. Since there are no conditions that make this project different from any other similar type of project, if allowed, the commission would be simply changing that long-standing design requirement. The applicant provided several photos that are in your staff recommendation. However, those photographs are not historic siding, and some of them are not historic buildings. Staff recommends disapproval of the lap, finding that it does not meet Section 3BD of the Salem Town Neighborhood Conservation Design Guidelines.
Okay. Any questions for Robin? Okay, is the applicant or would like to come forward and say your name and your address?
My name is Anita Howards. I reside at 200 Carden Avenue. First of all, I want to say that we know now that it was an oversight. It wasn't something we did intentionally. We did not see the note, and our builder did not notice it on the plans because he has not worked with the historical commissions before. He builds upscale housing, and he only uses the 7-inch reveal. So he went ahead and used that because that's what he normally does. Once we received the phone call that we were in violation, we did discuss it with our builder. We looked around. There are 3 houses across the street from us and another one right next door that do have the 7-inch reveal that are historic houses. So we do feel like that we actually match better with this reveal than with the 5-inch reveal. So in keeping with the historic plan of that neighborhood, we just feel like it is not out of place. It actually fits in better. We're a little perplexed by this all and why that 5-inch reveal is what the guideline says versus 7, and how this would make us look out of place, because I think, again, we are looking more in place than out of place. Also, if we need to take this down, we're looking at a roughly $18,000 expense, and that's taking it down, that's trashing all good materials, which to us is a real waste to do that, to throw all of this good material away. And again, it's the cost of it. So we would just like to ask that we can leave this up. And I think, as you can see from the photo, it's keeping in line with the overall guidelines of the Historic Commission and what you want for that neighborhood, which is what we want. And we know that we have talked to neighbors all along the line in this process of building these houses, and they very much like what we're doing. They feel like it is keeping in line with what is going on in that neighborhood. Any questions for me? Or
Any questions?
Gail, who made the decision, in your light of the events, who made the decision to go with a 7-inch reveal?
the builder.
While I sympathize with your predicament, which is no doubt expensive and time-consuming, your builder is in the business of looking at paper documents and then building that. By the same token, as commissioners, and certainly as a staff, we're also in the business of looking at documents and using those to evaluate a project. And if it says 5, and that's a long-standing guideline, it's 5. And so while I sympathize with your predicament, and yes, it will be expensive, I think your recourse in this case is with your builder. If he made that decision on his own and didn't pay attention to the documents by contract, I would assume that he is held to build to.
And I understand your point. I guess my thoughts are, though, that why do you have that as 5-inch versus 7 when you have historic houses there that do have 7? And why? I would think you would want us to fit in with that neighborhood.
A 7-inch reveal dates in a different period than historic homes in most every district, I think, in town. While you might find the rare exception, or certainly you might find in districts where siding has been removed and replaced, my feeling, homes that date from a later time, post-World War II, were about efficiency. And when you can efficiently mill a board and leave more of it exposed, you install fewer of them, the cost is less, and the material cost and the installation cost ends up being less. I think that has a lot to do with why you see generally why you see a wider exposure on homes that are post-World War II or post-40s homes. So, and even these days, I think that has a lot to do with why that decision is made. That's my personal opinion, but in homes that were constructed before that. It's not to say one doesn't exist, but it would be in the very, very rare minority, a historic home that you would see an exposure that great.
Well, what about the homes in our neighborhood that have that are historic homes?
Yes, Robin, were those prior to the,
They were changes that were made prior to the overlay.
right?
The aluminum siding, vinyl siding, and masonite siding.
Right. So those were before the
So
guidelines.
all of
were
those
placed.
homes that have the 7-inch, you're saying they had 5-inch and changed over to 7?
I'm not saying I know what the siding was before that. I'm saying of the images that you have in your staff recommendation, those sidings are not historic materials.
Well, I think what I was asking is that those homes were renovated prior to the development and the establishment of the overlay.
The three houses across
You
the
have to-
street.
Real quick,
Can I say who I am?
yeah, state your name and address.
Gail Wales, I'm at 200 Carden Avenue.
Okay.
Okay. The three houses across the street and one beside this house were built in the around 1910. I talked to the neighbors who have been in that neighborhood and in those houses for quite some time. They don't ever remember that siding being replaced. So their historic homes, which are very few, at three houses across the street, there's not very many left on that street or even in that little overlay, Salem Town. It's a very small overlay over there. So we're one of the very few houses that's new construction now because everything had already been done prior to when we started building. The houses that were built in 1910 have 7-inch reveal on them now, 3 in a row and one beside us.
But the fact is those were prior to the overlay, and when the overlay set the guidelines for
But the
that area.
historic-
I'm just trying to make that
yeah,
a
okay.
clarification.
Okay.
And we don't know if they were replaced, so Robin said they were, but we don't know. I mean, that's just a hearsay, I think.
Well, I think we can be confident that the vinyl didn't exist in 1910
Is there
and some of the
vinyl?
other materials.
It's not vinyl, it's wood, it's not vinyl siding on
If-
those historic houses.
If I may, I think we're getting into a cross argument. We're a little bit out of order, if you would agree. The guidelines state that it can be 5 inches. That's not italicized. That is the guideline. And that is what was on the permit, no matter what might be in the district.
Okay. So I guess the bottom line is it fits. What we have up there fits. The builder did not do it to scrimp on cost because he does build upscale houses, and that's what he uses all the time. I understand what you're saying, that that's the guidelines and that, we understand. We didn't do it on purpose. We absolutely just missed that. But are you saying that now you really want us to take down all the siding that's on that house now and just throw it away and start all over again? Not even thinking about the cost.
For 2 inches.
The fact just because it's in the guidelines, it doesn't sound like there's I still guess I don't understand what the reason is for the 5-inch versus 7 that you would want to do this so badly. I could understand if it was just totally looked out of place, but it doesn't.
Well, let us first, we need to deliberate it,
Okay.
ask questions about
Okay.
ourselves, and we appreciate that. But we take all that into account, but
Okay.
unless you had any other statement, I think you've said your case well, you've
Okay.
done well. You do get a chance to rebuttal later if there's something that comes up out of public hearing, so.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Okay, and I will open public hearing. If there's anyone that'd like to speak, I guess, against this project, if you'd come forward now, come to the microphone. And seeing none, if you'd like to speak for this project, you can come up now as well. Okay, close public hearing. Discussion.
Robin, in the past, has there been record of where there's instances where this situation has happened and they have had to remove the inappropriate siding?
Unfortunately, there have been many, and that's why we are so careful with the permit, putting notes on the drawings, having it in the text, trying to get that across as best that we can, because over the years, there have been quite a few, and in every single case, they've been asked to remove the siding and put back appropriate siding.
Did the drawings initially show the 7-inch and it was noted to make sure they change it to 5-inch?
It was noted in the staff recommendation, in the guidelines, and in 2 places in the permit.
But it wasn't shown on there, okay.
No, it was, I believe, I don't remember the details if we were told that or what, but it was on the drawings at the time of permit.
It was, okay.
Yes.
You're saying it was shown to be 5?
Correct.
Just wrong.
Was it originally shown as 7 and then we, on the plans, and we changed, we noted?
It was not originally shown as 7.
Okay.
I think there's a very clear hardship, but also a very clear precedent. The permit is very clear. The guidelines are very clear. I think staff was very clear in their recommendation, and it's just something that the builder missed, and that's where the owner's recourse lies. I don't see anything about this one that's any different than the multitude of times we've made someone take it off. It's not a great, it's a terrible situation, but to not continue to treat everyone the same, I think is worse.
And I'll add to that, we've had many cases like this before, and this is the hardest part of our unpaid jobs up here, frankly. And we're going to continue to have cases like this. And if we approve allowing them to keep it on there, then we'll even see more and more cases like this. I think the only question I would have is, and I'll admit that I'm not an expert in historic siding, but based on most of our districts, as Ben said, I assume based on the guidelines that historically, the reason the guidelines are written the way they are is because the historic home, the historic siding never exceeded 5 inches. One option, maybe, I don't know if we have or not, but would be to pose the question to staff, because the 5 inches is somewhat of a boilerplate part of our guidelines, I suppose. But just to go out to the Salem Town District and verify, A, the examples that have been cited are, not historic, not the original siding, and then B, whether there's a pattern of any, we might be wrong. This Salem Town might have been built by a builder that had a mill that milled 7, But, and we could potentially defer this, I guess, if the applicant requests a deferral for us to verify that. Otherwise, I don't see much of any other option.
But the owner would need to defer.
Requested.
Before we go down that road, I think a deferral is abdicating our duties a little bit here. The guidelines say 5, even if they're wrong, or if the guidelines need to be changed, the guidelines say 5, and it's 5. If 7 is what we need to do, then let's do 7. There's a course that is taken to make it 7. Whether it was siding reveal or any other guideline, I think it's a dangerous waters that we sail into if we're going down that road.
Well, we're also saying if in fact we go that direction, asking for a deferral, that we're implicating that we might change it, and that's not something that we can just decide.
If I might be recognized, just to chime in on what Commissioner Mosley was saying, that's exactly right. Where you have a guideline that you've already adopted that is in place, you are required, actually under state law and under the Metro Code, to apply that guideline. The state law says that the commission will apply the guidelines. The Metro Code says that the commission shall apply the guidelines. Where you have some discretion may be where there's not a hard and fast set in stone number like a 5-inch reveal, or where you're looking at scale and mass and things that may require some judgment on your part. But where you have a guideline that sets out a very specific mandate in what is appropriate, then I would have to advise you to go with that guideline based on what the state law requires and based on what the Metro Code requires. So I just wanted to share that with you as you all were having that discussion.
Okay. Thanks, Susan.
I'll just point out that, I wasn't suggesting that we vote against the guidelines or that I think no guidelines are perfect. We know that. I think we all know what we're going to find. I think the staff already knows what they're going to find, probably. But this is a significant hardship, the decision we're making, and I'm not suggesting we should start a precedent otherwise, unless we find, well, in fact, this neighborhood was built with homes with 7-inch siding, and at that point, the staff could bring to us and to the community a revision to the guideline if it were appropriate. And I don't know in terms of timing of the case and the deferral, or if we went ahead and acted on this today, how much time they have to comply and how that would, but if that were to play out.
And you can always look at changing the guidelines. It is very expensive. We don't have the budget to do that right now. And this isn't a new project that's before you, but a violation that does need to be corrected. So I think it's a little different than what you normally see, where there may be a good idea to defer, discuss the guidelines, maybe change them. This is not italicized information. It is a guideline, so it would mean notice to every single property owner and in the buffer area. That would take quite a bit of time and expense, and this is a violation that needs to get corrected.
And they are building under the existing guidelines.
That's correct. And if their permit is under the existing guidelines.
It sounds very much to me like the guidelines were clear, the plans were clear, and it's an awful mistake that got missed, and it's heartbreaking, but it's just a mistake that needs to be corrected. I concur.
Can we have a motion?
Motion to disapprove.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion carries for disapproval. The next on the list is 1507 Sweetbriar Avenue.
The applicant proposes a 1 1/2 story addition with 2 one-bay attached garages to an existing 1 1/2 story historic house to use as a duplex. The project includes the demolition of a non-historic rear deck. The project meets Section 2B2 for appropriate demolition and does not meet Section 3B1 for inappropriate demolition. We recommend disapproval of the addition, however, because it does not meet the design guidelines for an appropriately scaled addition. The project will almost triple the square footage of the existing house. The existing house is outlined in green, and this area is the addition. The Secretary of Interior Standard Number 9, on which all of our design guidelines are based due to state legislation, explains that new additions shall be compatible with the massing, size, and scale of the building in order to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. The applicant has worked to minimize the visual impact of the addition, and the lot is deeper than usual. However, staff still finds the addition to be out of scale because it more than doubles the size of the existing house. The building's length suggests a form that's more akin to a house behind a house rather than a simple addition of an appropriate scale. This form does not exist historically, therefore staff finds the project does not meet Section 2B, 2A, F, and E. To give you a little background on how the house behind the house has been dealt with by the Commission in the past, the Commission approved a similar scenario, but after construction determined that, again, this house behind a house with a connection in between was not a form that existed historically and expressed its intention not to approve similar forms again in the future. Therefore, when this project was proposed at Holly and 14th, it was denied. Now, these two examples are a little bit different in that they don't involve a historic building. This is all new construction, and they are corner lots. A more similar project would be an addition approved recently in Belmont Hillsborough. Although the project was well planned, the addition more than doubles the size of the original house and disrupts the development pattern of this portion of the neighborhood. Staff argues that if the infill construction does not meet the design guidelines, an addition that more than doubles the original size of the home also does not meet the design guidelines. In addition, it does not meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, as it has a greater negative impact on the historic fabric, the specific building, even than a new building in the district does. In addition, the proposal includes 2 one-bay garages located between the 2 units. The Commission has a policy to only allow for attached garages if they are at the basement level, as that is the only time that garages were attached historically. So in conclusion, staff recommends approval of a demolition of the existing non-historic deck. Staff recommends disapproval of the addition because the scale of it is too large compared to the historic home, causing an adverse effect to the historic building. In addition, the attached garage does not meet the Commission's policy based on historic conditions for the location of attached garages. The project does not meet Sections 2B2, A, B, F, and E, and 2B1I. You've received public comment from the Neighborhood Association in support of the staff's recommendation, and the applicant is here if you have any questions for them.
Okay, any questions for Robin? Just one thing just restate what you said. You had said that they had brought it before you and you've actually worked on them to get the scale, but this is just a final result of that?
They did a lot of work, definitely. And even when they started, they had done everything they could to make it as minimally visible as possible. But the fact is, it's still almost triples the size of the house.
Okay. If the applicant would like to come forward and just state your name and address.
Hi, I'm the property owner. My name is Doug Revere for 1507 Sweetbriar. And yes, to echo Robin's comments, we have had lots of conversations and trying our best to work collaboratively with the staff, which is always, we appreciate the comments, and we certainly see the points that Robin and the staff have made with regards to this lot. This is as you can see, a very interesting lot. Let me start, if I may, to give this some somewhat larger context in terms of the block. Because Sweetbriar, this part of Sweetbriar runs the first block west of Belmont Boulevard. As you come down Belmont Boulevard on our side of the street, there's a very large church. Then there's a single-family home. Then there is, you can see on this plan here, there is an existing fourplex. It's not a duplex, it's 2 duplexes that exist inside of 2 different structures. So that's the neighbor. On that side is the neighbor is a fourplex. In essence, 2 duplexes, 2 detached structures. And then there's our lot. As you can see, it's an extremely deep lot. It's in spots over 300 feet deep. And this plan that we have submitted is trying to provide an elegant solution to the interesting, the context of this particular lot. You can see that we've tried to save a beautiful existing tree. I believe it's an elm tree that we're going to try to save. And this plan tries to minimize the volume directly behind the existing house. All of that space that you can see, if you'll flip the pages to the application, you'll see that middle section right behind the existing house is all very low. It's one story mostly in that section, and trying to keep that minimal volume directly behind the house. And then, of course, we do have the new construction of the home, still leaving an extensive amount of open space and an extensive amount of open space in the rear yard as well. So as you continue down Sweetbriar, yes, there's an existing house right next door, and there's yet another single-family home beyond that, and then the historic district ends right in the middle of that particular block of Sweetbriar. The historic district ends in essence two homes to the west of where this home is. So we're trying. I'm here to be collaborative and to try to come up with a elegant and positive solution to this very unique lot. And I wish my architect were here. He had a conflict and couldn't make it today, so I apologize that the architect himself is not here. Probably be able to answer some of the more complex questions that you may have, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and of course we'll be here for additional comment. And if I may, I might reserve I get to reserve maybe 2 minutes for an additional comment towards the end of the public session.
Yeah, at the end of public hearing, yes.
Great, thank you so much.
Any questions, though, for the applicant before he sits down? None yet, yeah, thank you. Okay, open public hearing. Anyone that'd like to speak for this project, would you please come forward to the podium? And anyone that'd like to speak against this project, please come forward and say your name and address.
Good afternoon. I'm Lindsay Moffitt, 2402 Belmont Boulevard, and I'm here representing the Belmont Hillsborough Neighborhood Association. You may have received a letter from David Thompson, president of Belmont Hillsborough. Robin, were they able to? Okay. I want to make sure you understand how overwhelmingly Belmont Hillsborough neighbors are concerned with this type of infill. Stretching an historic house to these ridiculous proportions of, I think, 34 by 160 feet to accommodate two large family homes destroys the fabric of our neighborhood. We have an overlay for a reason, and that's to grow in a manner that maintains the sensibilities and the charm of Belmont Hillsborough. Not all parcels or properties are suited for a duplex, just as not all properties are suited for a foursquare. The approval of the house on Wildwood, which is a duplex behind a duplex, is very objectionable to the neighbors on that street. It is massive in proportion to that street. We feel this is massive in proportion to the other homes on this street. The duplex orientation is not our neighborhood's historic side-by-side. The garages are not historically sited separate and to the rear of the lot. Typically, garages are attached only where there is a grade drop or where there is an original garage to the historic structure. The second house, House B, is not subordinate to the front house, so it's even much larger. So we ask that you uphold our overlay guidelines and reject this type of infill as not in keeping with the character of Belmont Hillsborough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Brett Withers. I live at 1113 Granada Avenue. Couldn't say, as an East Nashville resident, I couldn't say better what my peer from Belmont Hillsborough said about the objections that many of our neighbors had. One thing that I think is particularly concerning to some of us in East Nashville is that we also have the R zoning, which allows single and duplex homes. And our neighborhood Lock on Springs had a similar application a while back that was similar in that it was two houses with garages connecting them in the center. That was certainly quite objectionable to the neighbors. The neighbors at that time persuaded the commission to deny that application, citing these very reasons. And thank you for upholding that community desire at that time. What we're asking you to do at this time is to continue to hold that standard. Many of us feel that if we begin to allow a house behind a house with attached garages connecting them, that this will be a disruptive precedent that will continue in all of our R-zoned historic districts. And citing that precedent, we ask you to hold the guidelines and move for disapproval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chris Reynolds, and I'm the owner of the house on the lower part of that drawing there. I'm next door to this proposed addition. And on behalf of my two sons and my wife and a large number of residents of Sweetbriar, the 1500, 1600 block, wanted to register my opposition to the project. So I'm not an architect, and the language of both my predecessors is in keeping with my opinion, my amateur opinion, and those of the vast majority of the neighbors of the street. I would like to say that the owner of this house and the project that's proposed is not an owner-occupied proposal. This is an absentee landlord who's a landlord and has a tenant. And the neighbors of the street are concerned about subdivision of the property. I don't know whether that's legal or not, but I share that concern on behalf of my neighbors. So I just want to register my public comment that we hope you will uphold the disapproval of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others? Okay, would the applicant like to do a rebuttal, or are you okay?
Well, clearly, and I apologize that I don't want to cause, pain and suffering certainly for the neighborhood. The balance and the difficulty of these situations is that, the property, it is unique, it is very deep, but in the broader context, it is properly zoned for this type of a duplex orientation. Front to back is something that it is, we've talked about this a lot, and there are examples of front to back, and I really think I want to be careful that what we're talking about is how to properly execute a front to back orientation, not the idea that duplexes are not allowed at all. Because as a property owner, I believe that there is a zoning, and that there is that I'm entitled, I guess, I hate to use that term, but entitled to build a duplex. And really the question is, in what is the best and least disruptive manner in which to do that? And we want to work with all constituents and all stakeholders to try to come up with a reasonable solution. But what I just want to be careful of is not that the decision wouldn't be that I'm not allowed to build a front to back duplex. It's just sort of the scale and the size and sort of the way that we implement that is really the question. And also to answer your question directly, of course, when you do a duplex like this, you are under Nashville's horizontal property regime. You can, in essence, create two different parcels.
Okay.
So
thank you very much. Any questions?
I do have a question for the applicant, and it relates to, it appears that at least on the property map, and it may be unimproved, that there's an alley that just kind of ends.
There is actually well, I think it appears on the map. It does not exist in reality.
Okay. I was just curious.
It's brush and debris back there.
Gotcha.
And that goes all, and that's all the way towards to Belmont Boulevard. It's on the map, but there is no alley.
There is no such. Okay. Is it recorded in the deed on the plat?
I do not know.
Don't know. Good.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Close public hearing. Discussion?
I've got a question and then some comments. Robin, the duplex next door, there's two duplexes next door. Are those buildings historic?
They are not historic, so we didn't look at them for part of the context. And two, with infill, we absolutely look at the context. For additions, context is important, but we're really looking more about the impact of that addition on the historic building than what might be around it.
Okay. And they weren't constructed under the current guidelines? Okay. I mean, with that in mind, I don't think the quadplex or two duplexes, whatever you want to call it, next door has much relevance. I think there's a fair amount to unpack in this application, and in some ways I'm sort of glad we're looking at it, because I think it takes sometimes an extreme example to force the conversation about when is something too big. I think a lot of people have expressed that, especially in Belmont Hillsborough. I think we see Miss Moffett every month, and there's a lot of people who think we've run past that point. Some people think we're getting closer. Some people think we're right on the edge. There's a lot of different opinions there. In my mind, there's no doubt this is just, the massing isn't even close. It's just gigantic, and it's not what was ever intended to be allowed under the guidelines. And you've got an umbilical connection. You've got two side-loading garages that aren't either below the first finished floor or in the rear of the property. There's a lot of things that I think don't meet the guidelines here. And I don't think it's just a matter of taking this other large house and butting it into the existing house and putting the garages in the rear. I think at some point, and there's no formula for the size. We can't just say once somebody's doubled the property, you can't meet the guidelines. I don't want rules like that. I think we need to have discretion on it. I just think once it's doubled the size of the original house, I think we need to take a hard look and decide whether it's still meeting it. That's all I'm saying. To address the applicant's comment about entitlement to a duplex, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of different ways to get at a duplex that don't involve this arrangement. I think some of the reason we're looking at it is because we haven't always sent a clear message about what's too big. I think the umbilical message was very clear a year or so ago, so I'm surprised to see that again. I don't think that's even close. But that's my initial thoughts on it. I'm wanting to hear what others think.
One thing
sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go, you go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask Robin, you've got an alternative here in the recommendation summary that if approved, the staff recommends consideration of other conditions. So my question is, do you think that this house could be modified to comport with the applicable guideline?
Thank you for asking that, because that is a new thing we're trying in the staff recommendations. We do not view that as an alternative, but staff and commission don't always agree. And so if you disagree and you do move towards approving it, those are some conditions that could be considered. But we don't view that as an alternative. We feel very strongly it is too big.
Okay, I didn't know what to call it. You've got if approved, so I'm thinking it might be an alternative in your mind. But the real thrust of my question is, do you think that it can be made, this house could be done, this addition, where it would be consistent with the guidelines?
I think any house could certainly have an addition. Now, how that's used, that's up to the owner. Is it going to meet their financial requirements? Probably not, but certainly the house could have an addition. But we felt like this was just too far away from any way that we could offer solutions and conditions in order to recommend approval.
Okay, I was just trying to understand what the smaller print here, what you were trying to get at here. You really, your real recommendation is for disapproval.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, and also, I mean, if this were an unusual, just one lot that we needed to sort of make some recommendations on how to better meet the guidelines, but we've got a line of lots that if were to be approved, we could end up with a string of long buildings all along Sweetbriar. And I don't think that's our intent at all. So it's not an exception. at all.
Yeah, the only statement I was going to make is I think we have to be careful. Just because we have a lot, it doesn't, not every type of building can fit on any type of lot. And I think this just kind of shows it that sometimes you just can't put everything on it, and we need to be sensitive to that, especially in these the historic fabric of these neighborhoods.
A couple of comments. As you all know, we all probably have different thresholds as to what's too much on some of these lots. We've had many conversations about that, right? And Robin, if you'll go back to the example that I guess we disapproved on, is it Fatherland and 16th or 17th? You all may recall. You all may recall that I think, if I remember the record correctly, I voted to approve this, or at least made a case that there are examples in East Nashville of the small cottage that was built behind the old house. And it's some of the neatest properties in East Nashville. Sort of, they're surprising when you come upon them, but they're these cottages that were built in the backside of a lot. They're always on corners like this, and so I felt like this was well designed, and the character and the scale and massing and all was pretty similar to some of those previous precedents in the neighborhood. In this case, we're not on a corner for one thing, but I think I'm going to put my planning commissioner hat on. As you all know, the planning commission's a fan of infill and supporting increased density and opportunities for density. And one of the things that we've seen at the planning commission for 20 years now is council members coming in and downzoning neighborhoods from R to RS, so from duplex to single family. And so it's been frustrating as a commission to when we're trying to promote infill and densification of our community in appropriate ways, that the political pressure is to downzone. And I'm afraid, sort of stretching the limits of what a duplex could be, such as this application, will just encourage more and more outcry from the community, and thus more political pressure to downzone our urban neighborhoods, which could then sort of backfire on the development community as well. So I think this is, clearly by the guidelines, clearly by the staff's analysis, doesn't meet a number of the requirements and the guidelines, and I concur with previous comments from other commissioners. Thanks. So I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendation, which is to disapprove the application.
Okay, and part of that, just a quick quote, is an approval of the demolition, but disapproval of the addition. Just restate that. Okay.
Second.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Approval of demolition of the existing, but disapproval of the addition. The next on the agenda is 2819 Hillside Drive.
The applicant proposes a new home at 2819 Hillside. Staff recommends disapproval since the building is not similar to the historic context in terms of height, scale, roof form, materials, and orientation. The home is 2 stories, as seen from the street, compared to the majority of homes on the hillside, which are 1 and 1.5 stories, like the one seen on the bottom right. The height of the building at its tallest point is approximately 32 feet, but the majority of homes are approximately 18 to 25 feet tall. The proposed home is 67 feet wide, compared to other homes in the vicinity that range between 48 and 50 feet wide. The right setback is 5 feet. And historic homes in the district have narrower widths, thereby creating more open space between the homes. And so staff finds the side setback to be inappropriate as they disrupt the rhythm of spacing created by the historic homes. The The applicant proposes a deconstructed front gable roof form that's not seen in the overlay. The commission approved a deconstructed cross gable form in a different neighborhood, but after construction decided that it did not meet the design guidelines requirement that roof forms for new construction be visually compatible by not contrasting greatly with the roof shape, orientation, and pitch of surrounding historic buildings. Up above, you can see a typical form for two-story buildings. The commission expressed its interest in not approving these forms in the future and typically directs applicants to match an existing form in the district. Prevalent roof forms found in the district include cross gable, side gable, and hipped roof forms. The most common two-story form is the side gable that you see here. The two-bay garage is also oriented to the street, which is incompatible with the vehicular orientation of the neighborhood, like we saw in the last application. Typically, vehicular access is either from an alley or from a side driveway leading back to a garage behind the house or to a basement-level garage at the rear of the house. In addition, it does not meet the design guidelines for outbuildings, as it's not historically appropriate location. It does not meet the Commission's policy that attached garages only be used when they're at the basement level, as again, that's the only time they were attached historically. There are two locations on the front of the building that are large blank spaces, not meeting the rhythm of openings seen historically. One such section is in the central portion of the second level, which is approximately 12 feet wide, and the other is the garage on the first level, which is approximately 22 and a half feet wide. The front facades of historic homes typically have windows every 8 to 10 feet. Although the central section is close to meeting the appropriate rhythm, its central location and prominence as the tallest and most forward portion of the building keep it from matching that historic context. The project does not meet Section 2B1G because it does not maintain the rhythm of openings. Typically, primary materials change happens on historic buildings horizontally rather than vertically, as seen on this proposal. Also, historic wood is usually a smooth finished painted wood rather than a raw surface with a stain. Although similar material has been used as an accent material, you have not yet approved it as a primary cladding. All of the materials in this portion of the district are brick. All of the buildings in this portion, the known materials do not meet Section 2B1D. Staff recommends disapproval based on the fact that the proposed does not meet Sections 2B1A, B, D, E, F, G, and H. You received a letter from the council member emailed to you yesterday and one from a neighbor emailed to you today in opposition of the staff recommendation. Just to give you a little background on the process, because I know this is a part of what's going to be discussed today, the applicant applied for a demolition and a building permit prior to the expansion of the overlay being officially what is called pending legislation. Once something becomes pending, which is after the first reading of council and reading with Planning Commission, then it's considered pending. And I'm talking about the expansion of the overlay that included this property. At that time, we have the ability to delay anything that really wouldn't meet the design guidelines, that would be repugnant to the overlay. In this case, the owner requested a demolition permit prior to the expansion being pending and a building permit on the day that it would become pending, which means that all departments would have had to sign off on their reviews in a matter of hours, which may have been an unreasonable expectation. In our case, we did get to it immediately, and we signed off on it in Metro's electronic permitting program. Our sign-off is not an approval, but it simply states that we didn't have any authority at that time to review the project. The demolition permit was issued, having been received in plenty of time to go through the reviews. The building permit was not, because it was not cleared by all departments before the pending legislation was enacted. Legal advised us that no matter when the application was applied for, no matter what the reason was for it not being issued immediately, we really didn't have any choice but to apply the process and apply the design guidelines. And the applicant is here and has a presentation for you, but I believe I saw the council member come in as well.
I need to please, just a minute.
Pardon?
I need to address the board.
Okay.
I feel I need to address the board because I don't know if we've had a pending legislation case to come before this particular commission. So I just wanted to just touch on a few things that Robin mentioned, and of course she did consult with legal on the situation in regard to when the permits were issued and when they weren't. And what she has stated is correct, that when there is a piece of pending legislation where the legislation has been filed, it has passed first reading, and it has already gotten a recommendation from the Planning Commission, legal has advised departments not to issue permits that would be repugnant to that legislation. In other words, it would frustrate essentially the purpose of the legislation or allow something to be done inconsistent with the legislation that is pending before the board. Before the council at the time. So when that happens, if wherever it is in the process, that's what the reviewing department has to consider. And so I understand factually that there was I don't want to call it a sign-off, but there was some sort of review initially before it became pending and before it became an ordinance. When the building permit request came in, it was actually pending. And I think at some point after it passed. Now, from a legal standpoint, we cannot advise the board to go against what an ordinance is requiring. And we cannot advise the board to go against, or advise the staff rather, to go against what an ordinance is required, particularly when our office has taken the pending legislation doctrine and advised other departments in regard to that. So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit because I don't think we've had a case like that before this body. We've had some, I think, before the Planning Commission, maybe before, or some of the other bodies, but I knew that was one that we hadn't, I don't recall having had a conversation with the board about that.
So this is pretty much not a matter of really well, I guess maybe I should let the applicant speak, but it seems like it's more about when it was actually approved more so than... And
you're correct. We would have to let the applicant articulate what the applicant's case is. There may be some things with regard to substance of the guidelines that they have an argument on, but we can't...
You're right. I shouldn't presume that. Okay. Any other questions to staff?
I have a question for legal, and I think it relates, certainly want to hear the applicant's case, but it relates to... We as a commission are not in a position to determine whether something applies or doesn't apply, just in terms of the pending legislation. That's not for us to decide. Is that correct?
That's a very good point. At this point, you are evaluating what is in place at this point before you. That's kind of the background, so I wanted to make sure that you all understood what the staff recommendation was based on and how things had transpired, but you're exactly correct. Your question today is, for the board, is whether or not it complies with the guidelines, because at this point, the overlay is in place. So that really narrows your question and narrows the scope of your review. And so I appreciate you asking that question. I should have touched on that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That should whittle down the issues. This may be, it's not within the scope of our review, but more curiosity. Is there a separate way for the applicant to challenge the pending legislation? The determination seems to be pending legislation applied. We're tasked with applying the guidelines and not looking back and judging that decision. Is there another avenue for recourse and is there another body that examines whether that pending legislation was correct?
No, the pending legislation is common law doctrine. It's a doctrine of the courts. And so there's not a body that would look at that per se. That's just developed out of some of the cases that Metro has been party to, and we've advised our clients based on what the outcome of some of those cases have been.
Well, let's go and get the applicant up. Maybe we're not even talking about what their specific concerns are. Would the applicant please come forward?
The council member may want to speak first.
Okay. And state your name and address.
Okay, my name is Franz Bodenbacher. I'm living in 182 North Berwick Lane, Franklin, Tennessee. I'm a professor at Vanderbilt, and I bought this property to actually live there. I thought this is a great opportunity for me to join the neighborhood. I was trying to be sensible about the neighborhood, but when I bought the property, then it became immediately evident that it had substantial structural defects, water flooding in the basement, foundation slipping, interior flood damage, lead paste, and asbestos. So I decided to tore it down. This was pre the historic overlay. So I obtained my building permit in November. Since then, the lot is empty. I applied for a building permit in January 23. I went downtown. Everybody signed off. I talked to the Historic Commission. You can see the okay of Paul Hoffman here. And the fire marshal requested hydrant testing, although it may have needed to be ignored. So I have this runaround sheet, which probably I should have gotten. And anyway, at that time, I didn't get the building permit. However, I paid and had the fire hydrant testing process being initiated. The fire hydrants were tested 13th of March. And at that time, the overlay was already in place. So actually, it was much faster than anticipated. A block captain who I spoke to in October said that hopefully in February, but there is a grace period of 3 months' time so to obtain a building permit, which is wrong. However, at that time, we had already our contemporary design, which I wanted to build there. So essentially, it's a passive house. It only requires 10% of the energy required for conventional construction. I had an inverted roof for solar panels and rainwater collection, and I was trying to keep it at low cost. The design already has incorporated a rain screen design, which actually allows you to control the moisture and minimizes the energy expenditure on this house. The rain screen design relies on the facade being supported, structurally supported by the house. The house, as you see here, it is overlaid with the original house. The front set line is identical. On the left, I have 6 feet added, and on the right, I had 3 feet added. I'm very sensible because I really wanted to conserve all the trees there. It's a beautiful lot. It's a half-acre lot. And you see that very little was added to the massing of the house. When the overlay was in place, I had to deal with Metro Historic Commission. So I sent these plans for review to have a starting point to see where we need to go in terms of reconstruction. It said that I need to have a side gable or a cross gable. They also said that I'm right on track with height, front setback. They requested a primary entrance, brick veneer or stone foundation. The windows had to be changed. They said that some lots might need a front-loading garage. The house was a little wider than the original one, but 50 to 60 feet seemed to be appropriate. So once I got this back, I thought, well, I look into the neighborhood, and there are 5 houses on the hillside. 2 of them are, I believe, non-contributed. There are cinder block foundations. This is the house to the left, and the other house is to the right. The house to the right reaches to about 5 feet. That outbuilding there on the left-hand side reaches to about 5 feet to the lot boundary line. So when I then looked further down the road, those are the 2 remaining houses on Hillside Drive. So the first house is clearly also non-contributing. So the 2 on the right-hand side are potentially contributed to the neighborhood. So one is 2-story and one is 1.5-story. So I thought that going to the building guidelines may be a good start. And although I have opposed the overlay, I think it has good merit. And I don't like fake old buildings. I really don't. I also like what they point out here, that this neighborhood is generated or being established in the 20th century and collects a variety of building styles and types. It illustrates an evolution in architectural styles and technologies. A new building should continue this tradition while complementing and being visually compatible with surrounding historic buildings. That was the mission. We actually met with Robin, Preston Cork, my architect, and then we decided to go over the plans. And we have reconstructed, re-engineered this approach, and this is the thing I'm quite happy with. And I was shocked to see the critique, what we got, because we thought we're 89% there. However, let me address now the critique what we faced. I know that the front-loading garages are a no. Robin told me that. I decided to go in with that front-loading garages, and I tell you why. My dad was wheelchair-bound for 3 years. I took care of him. That's when you learn to make compromises. This lot is on a hill. It is the steepest hill in the neighborhood. I cannot see how you can make that driveway safe to enter the road. I had bypass surgery last year, quadruple bypass surgery. I may go down the same route, and that's where I cannot make compromises. I'm sorry, this is where I cannot make compromises. So, what we really are facing here is a first draft to bring this forward to the Commission to see and seek your input to get a better feeling where we're at. So I told you that the house is similar width. What I haven't pointed out is that we actually set back the front portion so it's only 56 feet wide currently. There are 3 houses in the neighborhood which are 33 feet tall. We're exactly 33 feet tall. One house is opposite. The front setback is identical to the house, and the neighbor's setback is also only 5 feet. I agree that the materials, what we've selected, may not be ideal. We've been trying to follow the guidelines. I went for brick veneer on the front face of the house, and then wood siding to actually have the garage door concealed. What I'd like to do is, I would actually, in terms of the materials, I would suggest to replace the wood siding with cement boards. I would only require 2 materials, and that is stone to offset the basement from the main level, and then I would like to use that stone for the middle section of the house to make it compatible with the neighborhood. I like to keep the accent wood in the center part of the house because I like to match that with the garage entrance, and I also like to match that with the front door and the entry side. The chimney could be stone above the roof. I have no problem. I have even no problem getting rid of the chimney. I'd like to have the windows aluminum cladded wood or UPVC, and I'm also disappointed that I cannot use back ventilated metal roofs. Everybody knows that asphalt shingles are the least energy efficient material to use at all. So there are roofs in the neighborhood. Here you see there is one historic building which has a copper roof. There is another not historic building on Fairfax which have a metal roof in the same color I would like to use for this. I know the roof form is not common. The original house had a cross gable, but I do think the roof form marks the evolution of an architectural style, and I think it is visible, compatible with surrounding historic buildings. You see that the roof design maximizes the living space. Here you see a house 2 streets down, which has a roof where you can see that the living space is an add-on. I think that doesn't make sense. It wastes a lot of space and resources in an area where we cannot afford to do so. The windows and the rhythm, we can certainly try to improve it. I want to point out that there is a window in the middle of the garage. I also want to point out that we were happy to reduce that wood siding in the middle to maybe have the windows spaced more regularly. However, in conclusion, I want to point out that the roof form makes an evolution. Materials will able to change. What I wanted to make sure is that everybody understands the overlay was put in place with the assumption that I have a building permit. Delays from Metro in obtaining a building permit cause my serious hardship. And I really hope that you approve this proposal, or at least come forward with suggestions which are binding so that we can move ahead with the planning. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Any question to the applicant before he sits down? I may want later just the ones that you are actually saying that you would change on their list here. We may just go back through that later.
Sure. I think the main issues need to be addressed really before we can move forward, and I'd be more than happy to work with staff, work with you guys to make sure we can build an attractive house there which really sets forward the evolution in architectural styles.
We might bring Preston back up with you to help with that. Okay, first I'd like to open up for the council person to speak. Thank you for being patient.
Always learn something. Thank you very much. I'm Berkeley Allen, council member for the 18th District, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you. I would just like to say that I don't usually stand here and ask for support of something that's not totally in line with the guidelines, but I do feel like this is a very, very, very unique situation. You've heard most of the circumstances. One that you didn't hear was that the only reason it took so long to get the fire hydrant test done was because of the extremely cold weather. I think normally that could have happened quickly. It just seemed to be a perfect storm of things that held up getting the demolition permit. So I think in addition to the unique circumstance of why the building permit didn't happen in the timing that the owner was hoping, it's also a slightly unique part of our overlay expansion. Hillside Drive is a slightly different character from the rest of the neighborhood, which is mostly bungalows. I think in certain other parts of the neighborhood, there's a very definite street rhythm and type of building that this would definitely stand out as something tremendously different. On Hillside, it's an interesting eclectic mix of different ages, so I think it's more compatible to some creativity there. And finally, as Dr. Baudenbacher mentioned, this area was added to our overlay expansion late in the process, and we had some discussion back and forth with neighbors about exactly where those borders should be. There were homes on the other side of his home that wanted to be included, and we, as we were discussing that, were under the understanding that he had his building permit and that this would not affect him, and so that it was not damaging to him for us to include him in the overlay. So I don't know how that figures into your decision, but it was certainly something that we were considering at the time. So the neighborhood, in the adoption of the overlay, was expecting his property to be a modern design. And then finally, I appreciate the effort that both Robin and Dr. Baudenbacher and Preston as well have gone through to modify the design. I feel like this is a tremendous move toward, I think, being compatible with the guidelines. Clearly, it's not totally there, but I really appreciate the effort that's gone into that on both parts. I know it's been a lot of discussion and a lot of serious thought has gone into that. Also, just to point out that you do have a letter from Martha Stinson, who was the spearheading person behind the overlay expansion, and she was also part of these discussions, and she's of the same feeling that I am, that this is a unique circumstance. The owner was under the impression, and we were under the impression that his building permit was already in line. So some decisions were made based on information that unfortunately turned out not to be true, but none of us knew all those circumstances at the time. So our decisions were based on that information about the building permit as well. So with all those, what I think are unique factors in place, I would ask in this one unusual circumstance that you consider the proposal that is before you and approve it, or to make modifications that Dr. Baudenbacher can live with and work with. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, opening public hearing. People who would like to speak against this project, please come forward and say your name and address. Seeing none, anyone would like to speak for this project, please come forward.
I'm Preston Quirk, architect working with Mr. Bodenbacher on this. You had asked about just kind of a recap of which things he would be willing to change as far as the conditions. It's obviously an unusual situation with the timing on this project, but there's basically on the staff recommendation, they said that we did not meet 7 of the conditions, A, B, D, E, F, G, and H. And of those, the ones that we're willing to make adjustments to are item D, which relates to the materials, having only 2 primary materials. F is a pretty minor item about adding a sidewalk to the front door. We did plan to do that. And then adding windows to the blank wall areas, we're willing to do that. So I just wanted to kind of clarify those items, and then just wanted to say that, you heard from the council person. It's unusual for a council person to come and even speak on one of these cases, and the timing is odd. And you also have the letter from Martha Stinson, who was kind of the person pushing the overlay in the first place, that's asked that this be allowed to be approved. So I think that's all I have, unless there's other questions for me.
Don't mind as well. Do you have in front of you the staff recommendations?
Do I have them in front of me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The bullets that they had, could you look at those too for me? About the total width. Any of those are part of that?
If I go through here, at this point, I think we're not willing to compromise on the width we have at this point. The second one, I mentioned materials. I think we said we would make adjustments on that. Same with the third point is a material question. The roof, he would like to stay with his metal roof, so we're not willing to go to a shingle roof at this point. Chimney could be masonry. Yes, we could accept that. Doors and windows, we could accept that. Materials, we can accept that. Not willing to move the garage at this point. Front setback, we can comply with that. I think we do at this point.
You can comply with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not willing to change the roof design at this point. Utilities, rear or either side, we would be able to do that. Central portion of the second floor, that was the issue on the openings. We would be able to do that. And then walkway from the front porch to the street. So I think that's the whole list. And if I go through there.
So there's like 4 here. Okay.
4 no's and the rest are yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Anything else?
No, not for me. Others.
I just have a quick question about, it really has to do with grade change and getting into the house and the slope on the lot. I've looked at the building section. Can you, just in terms of dimensionally, hillside's kind of up here, front door is 8 feet lower?
Hillside's about 3 or 4 feet above where the front porch would be. There's kind of a quick drop off from hillside, and then the drop from the main floor down to the basement level is probably about 11 feet. It's had a fairly deep basement to begin with. So,
okay.
I mean, it's a steep lot, and it keeps going down from there to Blair. There's probably, I'm going to say there's 50, 60 feet from hillside down to Blair at that point of the neighborhood. It's quite a drop. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Preston? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Were there any others that wanted to speak regarding this project? Okay, I'm going to close public hearing. Discussion.
Okay, this is going to be fun. Before we start talking about all the materials and widths and such, I would like to talk about the timing of the overlay. It seems to me that this project was very much in process, and then 1 minute the overlay comes down and we just put our foot down and tell him he's got to change everything. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. I keep hearing this outside of this commission a lot, and I think it's going to be a problem for us in the future. So please share your thoughts. I'd appreciate it.
I guess I just feel like after we're not to judge once it gets to that point. I mean, once it comes before us, we just have to deal with the case as it is. There are other, I guess, decisions that were made before it came to us, and apparently there was a lot of deliberation about it, and it was brought to us. So I think there is a valid point, and we talked about it a lot in the beginning, but I think that we just have to deal with the case at hand and try to make the best recommendation based on that. And I think this has obviously caused a lot of, things to consider, and I believe legal and staff are dealing with that, and maybe putting things in motion that will take care of it, make it clear in the future. But I think we just have to, once it gets to this point, we can't deliberate it. I think we just have to deal with the case in hand.
I want to say that as we evaluate it, and if in fact we decide as a group to make compromises that does not necessarily go along with the overlay, that we need to be very, very clear in our discussion and our recommendations, such that they're not taken as precedent, and setting that precedent and as we go forward. So, in our deliberation, I think we need to be very, very clear on that.
I agree with what Brian and Ann have both said. And further to Ann's point, I don't think one of those considerations is the fact that there's some apparent and possibly huge unfairness in what's gone on before us. That's just not something that we're supposed to address. It's happened, and it's part of the record, but if I understand Susan correctly, that's not a distinguishing factor. We just have to apply the guidelines, and that doesn't mean we can't be creative and find some way to make this work. We just can't make one of those reasons the permit took forever.
I think the applicant himself he pointed it out, he didn't crutch it. It is, and I think probably to his chagrin, he's accepted that things didn't quite turn out as all parties expected, and as unfortunate as that is, I think the applicant's presentation wasn't based on it was addressing what's before us, which is about the guidelines, the materials, and those things. Briefly, Sam, to your point, because I know we've got a lot of folks waiting. I'm recalling back to involvement in establishing the guidelines for the Germantown Historic District, to speak specifically to concerns about will there be a rush to demolish? What's the motivation to utilize historic or preservation zoning? I think that's always a concern in a neighborhood, and you do often see, not a rush, but you'll see some applications that'll come in when discussion of this is starting. But in that case, we took it upon those who were trying to make it happen to work with landholders, commercial developers who had a large stake in whether we were going to be successful or not. In more homogeneous neighborhoods, and I would consider Hillsborough West End and this area to be a little bit more homogeneous in that they're single family. There's not it's not overrun with pockets of industrial development as the Germantown district was. The issues are just different, and so working with stakeholders, you're either a homeowner or you're not, and probably you're either for it or you're not, and I think that really kind of rolls into, it's got to start somewhere, and the guidelines have to be addressed, and you pick a date, and the court, the workings of government do what they do, and that's I don't have any other or better argument.
I know it's got to start somewhere, but I think we have an applicant here who got caught in the middle, and I think we need to have a little more common sense about this. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask Susan one more time. So you're saying that it is outside of our legal authority to consider the circumstances around the timing of the legislation and the timing of the permit in our deliberation today. Is that correct?
I feel like I'm being
I just need clarity. No, I need clarity, because that's what I thought I heard.
I mean, certainly you can listen to it and you can discuss it. So to the extent that you are deliberating with that in mind, I think that's okay, and that may work into whether or not you craft an approval that is going to be allow the property, which I understand if all of these guidelines are met or all of these conditions are met, essentially, that it would be in compliance with the guideline. To the extent that it works into the rationale as to why you want to even entertain that, I think you can deliberate on that. However, that is something that has passed, and there is no authority under the Metro Code for you to grant an exception in circumstances like what have been described. It kind of it's not fair argument. You don't have that authority. You have what the code says is the Historic Zoning Commission shall adopt design guidelines for each historic overlay district and apply those guidelines when considering preservation permit applications. That authority is very clear, and I've actually been searching to see if there was any other kind of variance authority or anything else that I might have been missing. That kind of authority does exist on some boards, and one of the boards that it does exist on is the BZA, where if there is some type of hardship or if there's some type of variance that you can request a deviation from what is standard. But here, it doesn't appear that that's where your discretion lies. To the extent that there's some discretion, it would be in whether or not, for instance, in the last case, where you're dealing with massing and you're dealing with whether or not this is too big or something like that, where you have where you have guidelines that address certain things. It's my reading of the code that you have to apply those guidelines, and I don't see a way to take into account arguments outside of that, unless, again, they are pointing back to something in the guidelines or something in the code. I hope that answered your question, at least it may not have been a direct answer, but I hope that answered your questions in substance. Yes, ma'am.
In the materials that we've been provided under background on page 5, there's the comment that legal has advised staff that whatever the reason, if the permit was not issued prior to the pending legislation date for the extension of the neighborhood, the property must go through the same process as any other property. I agree with Sam over here. This is it's a heartbreaking situation. This man has been caught up in a time bind and didn't get that permit issued before that pending legislation came to be. Now, my question is, what's the law behind the pending legislation? Where do I go to look at that? I'd like to look at that.
Okay. I think I didn't handle that case, but I think the case that it comes out of that was probably the most prominent Metro case is the Harding Academy case. And there was a situation there where there was a piece of legislation that was pending at the time and an application for a permit. I would have to review it more closely to be able to expound on it more thoroughly, but that's the case, and I can get you a copy of that as well.
It's a Harding Academy case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Was that their master plan? Establishing their master plan?
I can't recall right at this moment, but I'll be happy to pull a copy and share it with the entire board if need be.
I think that since this is, I've heard you say, Susan, that this initially when you commented that this is a case of first impression, correct? All right. It's just a serious case in my judgment. And I'd really like some time to investigate, really, to look at this legal issue, because as Aaron pointed out, if that's correct, and I'm not saying it's not, I don't know. We're whittled down here. We're greatly whittled down in what we can do. Because if that's the case, then we have nothing else that we could do except to disapprove this. And I hate to, unless we do some of the little smaller things and kind of create a situation.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, Ben brought that up about the applicant was very, he actually said, addressed the issues, and that's why I wanted Preston to go through them one by one about what they
would or would not do, then, unless we do that.
I mean, and we're looking at 4 that we can talk through with them on, and maybe there's something we can get. I think, as Susan brought up, we've heard it, we have a lot of compassion for what it. I still feel this body has to judge it now that it's to our board, and they have given us, and I mean, he's worked with it. I think they've given us some things that we can talk more about. I don't know what our opinions or our decision is going to be after it's all over with, but I would like for us to talk about this case. Let's talk about the case, talk about the bullets, and let's see where we get. We know what's out there, and the applicant knows other recourses he can do, but I think our board has to deal with the case.
Well, I would certainly like to explore that too, if we could do some of these.
I have one last.
She doesn't want to call it an alternative, but whatever the smaller letter print stuff is here that the staff has included.
I have one more thing to say. I'm no lawyer, and I would not dare to say that I know anything about the law, except to not break it. If this applicant is caught in the middle on pending legislation, then it's not legislation. And that otherwise, he would not even be before this commission, and we would not be talking about any of this. Okay? I just think we need to, with a common sense perspective, consider that.
I agree with what Brian has said. I think we need to look at this case, apply the guidelines. I think that what Susan was saying is the hardship, it can be a motivating factor for us to work on a solution and spend more time on this than we might otherwise. It cannot factor into an explicit exception, and precedent that we set here will be precedent for all. But I think we should try to see what we can do within the guidelines, and if it doesn't look like we're getting there, maybe the solution is for someone to suggest to the applicant that they defer so the pending legislation issue can be researched and someone can get comfort there. There's another solution. But outside of anything other than just looking at the guidelines and trying to make this work within the guidelines, we can't go outside that. I think it's crystal clear. And I'm hearing people talk about doing that. If you are doing that, you are disregarding legal's advice pretty clearly, I think. So I think we should at least try.
The applicant has specifically asked for our guidance. It is our duty to give the applicant our guidance. And to that end, our guidance is governed by dealing with either agreeing with the staff's concerns and or addressing those through the guidelines in terms of height, item A, item B, scale, D, materials, E, roof shape, F, orientation, G, proportion, rhythm of openings, and H, addressing the outbuildings. I'm not sure where that one comes in, but certainly having an opinion and tying back our guidance to the applicant or approval or suggestion of something as it's drawn or depicted or in some other way is what the applicant has asked us for, despite our feelings otherwise about the legal Sisyphus he might find himself in if we defer it.
So unless there's more, let's go on and start talking about this case. If the board does, unless Susan says we can't.
I just have one thing to say on that, and I think that's a healthy discussion. But what I heard the applicant say was a binding suggestion. And so I want to just caution the board about that, because you can deliberate and you can give suggestions, but that I want him to understand that's not necessarily a binding suggestion, because they've got to work together with the staff and make sure that those suggestions work if you choose not to make a formal decision today. Of course, if you make a formal decision today and go ahead and implement some of the things that are suggested here, then that would be a binding decision. So I didn't know which way the board would ultimately go, but I wanted you to have that information as you discuss it.
Okay. So let's talk about the items. Does anybody want to jump into them? I circled the ones that Preston had brought up, the total width that that was one of the ones that they were not, did not want to compromise on. So that's one I think we should talk more on. The asphalt roof, the garage being in the garage location, and the roof form. If we can just kind of start with those, it may go different directions, but maybe we can start with those.
I'm going to start at the bottom, and this is a clarification for staff. Item H, which references outbuildings, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you clarify
Yes.
Any issue we have there?
That's where you'll find the information that garages should be in historically appropriate locations, and yeah.
What about the roof form? I guess the roof form may be something we could talk more about. Which one does that fall under?
Don't remember the numbers, so let me look it up real quick. Oh, thank you. Yeah, E talks about the roof form should be compatible and not contrast greatly with surrounding historic buildings.
So the pitch.
And you've approved, not, I won't say it's similar, but that sort of deconstructed kind of form is something that you approved in a different neighborhood, and after it was constructed said you really didn't feel like it met the guidelines. And since that time, we have been directed to provide guidance that the form really should match a roof form found in the district. And we've even taken to the point that if it's 1 story, it should match 1-story forms, and if it's 2-story, it should match 2-story forms. And the 2-story forms in the immediate context are side gable.
We do have some precedent that might be a little bit relevant. Forget the street it was on, but it was at the very edge of Greenwood Neighbors, I think. We approved a Spanish stucco home that had a remarkably different roof form than a lot of houses around it, though there were examples of that roof form historically. I don't know if we could ever find a example of this roof form historically, but I thought in that previous case I'm bringing up, I think there was precedent there that on the edge of a district and without sort of a very certain established rhythm, there was more, not leniency is not the right word, more flexibility in at least roof forms in that instance, and some of those same characteristics are here, not all, but I think we have been able to distinguish situations like that before.
One thing, I don't want to speak for the applicant, but in hearing his initial conversation and seeing the initial design and probably an explanation for the orientation of this as a front-facing gable, or certainly an allusion to a deconstructed front-facing gable, is that from the site plan, it appears that the majority of the house is south-facing with that tilt and would accommodate solar panels. And I know that doesn't necessarily speak to the guideline, but as we look at the roof form and talk about its appropriateness, certainly I think as a design decision that probably went into the majority of the roof, that portion of the roof being available for a solar orientation.
And I also feel, although I do remember that case that we went back on, but we originally, the roof slope is, with the compatible roof slope, I'd be a little bit more in this situation to be able to accept it. Since it's a new building and the pitch it works, I didn't even pay attention to what Ben brought up, but I'm not as me personally, I'm not as turned off about the way the roof is constructed for this project, particularly since it's new construction and they're trying to match roof slopes. Since it's quiet, how about the garage? Let's talk a little bit about the garage. I know that's probably the biggest issue, I think, but that we might have, because that one is the more tougher one.
Did I understand that he's going to try to obscure the garage some way by putting wood or some kind of a wood covering up over it?
That was one suggestion.
Yeah, that the applicant made.
I'm really not in favor of a front-facing garage if there's another solution. I think we've been pretty clear about that all along. I think here you could, with that slope, either take advantage of the slope and put it in the rear, or do a side loading further down past the midpoint of the home. There's options there maybe, depending on the width of the house. Maybe the width of the house has to be decreased to allow a driveway. But there are options, and I'm sympathetic to any kind of disability argument, but there's a lot of ways to engineer around that inside the home as well, whether it's a lift or something else. The location of the garage, especially if you allow it to be attached, there's all kinds of ways to engineer within the home to address any kind of issues like that.
I agree that that's probably the biggest concern that I have, and us being able to justify and document why we allowed it when there are some viable options to take place. And I think that, to me, that this is one of the bigger issues that we need to deal with.
Okay, nothing about the garage. Okay. Okay. What about the roof to be asphalt shingle? What do we feel about materials for that, metal roof?
I think, with the orientation of the roof and the porch, the porch form that is on the front of the house, that is appropriate. Historically, you'd see a metal roof form on a porch, and as that, given the orientation of the roof is some sort of front-facing gable or an allusion to that, it's given its height, and that hillside is what, 3 to 4 feet, based on Preston's comments. I don't know that is extremely visible from the front. It's relatively low sloped. I don't have as much issue with that. I think it's not like you have this 12-12 pitch and it's a dominant thing from the street on the roof. I don't have as much.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I want to interrupt you only because we have a commissioner that is not present right now who has been a part of the deliberations, and I think we may need to recess momentarily so that she can be privy to the entire conversation, because I anticipate that she will want to vote on it. And just in the interest of making sure that the record is clear as to who was privy to what information during the deliberations in the event of an appeal, I wanted to state that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I guess we better take a 5-minute recess. Sure. Did you hear the discussion?
I did on the garage.
Okay. Ben, do you mind please kind of repeating your roof?
I don't.
Thank you.
So in discussion about the roof, addressing that specifically, I think the metal roof on the front porch piece is pretty, it can be found. Examples of that can certainly be found in the neighborhood. Given the existing slope, assuming that the orientation doesn't change, and it alludes back to a southern, pretty good little bit of the roof that's oriented towards the south for solar panels. The low slope of that, and that being metal, is not problematic for me. I mean, you may take issue with the roof shape, but in terms of what's visible from the street and its orientation and the amount of it, it's not, my comment was, it's not as if it's even a 6 and 12 or a 12 and 12 pitch where there would be as much roof as there is wall material. That would be a different story, but in this case, a metal roof versus an asphalt shingle roof, I don't see a problem with that particular item.
If we were to compromise on that, we would need to make sure that we were very explicit to why we were making the exception.
And I don't see, I mean, there are examples, and perhaps I'm missing something, and the staff can correct me if I am. There are examples on historic homes of metal roofing, and so I think in this instance that we encourage asphalt shingles over metal. I don't see that as going against the guidelines, in my opinion.
I just didn't want to make sure that we cover our bases as we make our decision.
But you did express some characteristics that made that easier, like the low pitch and not being conspicuous and stuff like that.
Could I add just one little point to that? The design guidelines do talk about roof pitches should, in most cases, be 612. So if the argument is this one's not seen very well, it is only a 312. Just the form and the material is kind of going together.
Yeah, I'll qualify that as, again, if we don't change the orientation of the roof and that it doesn't appear more massive than it currently is in the front elevation, all those things apply to my comments.
Any other kind of roof comments and we can go back to any of these. I'm just kind of hitting them by the points right now.
Wanted to ask Robin, I may have skipped over it here, but the specific roof materials, I didn't see in here, and if you could point it out to me if it's here, where the guidelines, whether they state specifically metal roofs, are not allowed or not appropriate, or is it just in the language about being not contrasting greatly with surrounding historic buildings?
That's right. It's there. It's looking at that historic context. And he showed two that had metal roofs. One of them is new construction before the overlay, and the other one is a new roof on a historic home. We just didn't see any historic buildings with historic metal roof on it. But again, really, I think that what material it is far less important than the roof form, in staff's opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I'm going to, like I said, using the staff recommendations. The top one was the other one, when we start from the bottom up, which was the width, which some of the garage could have something to do with that. But if my measurements are right, this is about 77 feet wide, and staff recommendation was 55. And I was just adding up 56 and 10, so I thought it was about, did I say 76? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's 56.
Yeah, 67 feet. Not 20, sorry about that. 67 feet, not 77 feet. So I think we're looking, that's probably the next thing we need to talk about is the width of this on the site now.
Slide where they showed the original foundation. And I think they added 6 feet on one side, is that correct?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question, please?
The original foundation of the older home, the existing home, did they not add 6 feet on the left-hand side as we face it?
I don't know about the original home.
I thought they were using the footprint of the...
His presentation, not staff's presentation.
Okay, yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Is the orange there?
Yeah, I think this is the addition, the 6 feet additional width.
So in that image, the gray is the original house width?
Isn't that correct? In this sketch?
I think the applicant would be able to.
Please come up, yes.
Sorry, the colors are a little bit faded. You will see an orange line.
Could you come to the microphone, please?
Okay, you see an orange line there. It's where that arrow is on the right-hand side, pointing down.
that is inset.
Right.
Yes.
That's the original house.
Right.
That's the original house.
Okay.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And the gray one is the new construction, and there is a orange, light orange color. That's the roof shape, and it seems a little wider there because there is 3 feet of roof overhang.
Okay.
On this building as well. So it is originally 6 feet, but then it steps back on the first floor. After the first floor, it steps back to 56 feet.
Okay,
So the top floor is 56.
Okay, so the lighter orange is the roof overhang, and the other with the 6 feet width added to the existing. Okay,
Yes.
that's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think to clarify there, the 56-foot width, when you look at the form of the front of the house, it steps back, a few feet. If you look at it in 3 dimensions, it steps back a few feet. So as you analyze that, I think form probably has more to do than dimensions in a flat plane in that argument, and just in terms of the total form and its appearance from the street.
Well, and I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand the 55 versus...
Sure, what the true frontage is, what's presented, and what 55 how it might be different at 55.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask staff too if there was the 55 feet.
Sort of explain.
We didn't
understand.
We didn't look at the building that used to be there. We looked at the historic context that exists today, if that helps. I'm concerned that a lot of these conditions really require redesign, and I'm wondering, just a suggestion, if maybe the best course of action is to let the applicant know which one of those is important to you and which they should look at, and maybe defer, but I'm not sure how we can resolve each one of these without completely redesigning the building.
I agree with that and think that while the applicant requested sort of binding guidance on what needed to be changed, I don't think we can really do that. And we've had other conversations in previous meetings about trying not to do that because it's not very easy and we don't have the result of it in front of us, and it's a little unclear what we're approving. So with that in mind, I'd suggest we try to narrow down what are our issues, and then hopefully it's 2 or 3, and then we can suggest to the applicant a deferral to focus on those 2 or 3 issues with staff.
Well, it's still all the other bullets too, but they just felt good about those that those are feasible. And and that was where I'm getting. That's exactly where I was going. That we're at the last one, and I thought if we could give that, and then we would kind of throw it back at the applicant and see if we go from there. So on the width, based on what you've seen and where now the understanding of this is based on the neighborhood, the 55 feet. I'll throw the first one out, I guess. I mean, obviously this is probably where it gets really into design because, when you're changing the width of it, I think we'd be willing to look at a compromise, but we just have to really, I think we just have to be careful that it doesn't get too wide, but yet understand, once the redesign goes, there may be some flexibility on that number. But I think it's a good guideline to think about what is already the context. Go.
Yeah, and I think the width and the garage being a concern somewhat go hand in hand, because if you reduce the width, you've got the proper drive lane for the car to get to the side rear or completely from the rear. So those, I think, go hand in hand. And then the roof form, I'm not sure, maybe that's sort of a third place category there on how strongly people feel about that one from what I've heard. But those are the three that I feel like we've focused on. Is that a fair summation?
I agree.
Okay. What other discussion? Because we've got to, now we've got where we are with it. And basically, on the staff recommendations, which were several, and the architect came back with the 4 that they were not willing on, and now we've got basically 2 that we feel strongly about. If they would, as Robin pointed out, this is still even just doing just the bullets or a redesign, but we can't make the deferral to do this. They're actually conferring in there now, but
can we suggest a deferral?
We can, if they're willing to. If you both of you would come up that way, just in case we have Preston questions too. Do you need to say something?
I think it's important that this is an iterative process, and I really appreciate your support and the way you discuss this, and maybe I would also appreciate any help so that I don't be in front of this committee, but it would not change the plans and the design of the house at this point. So you had some input, but we need to know whether we can use cement boards, whether we can use cement boards on the first floor. We need to know whether we need to use brick veneer. We need to know whether we can have a front loading garage. Those are the important parts. We need to know the roof form. It doesn't make sense to reconstruct and have another 10 hours of architect's time spent on the design without having guidelines. And that's what I asked you for. I agree that
there are guidelines, and we're trying to work with what is in front of us.
Yeah.
And we've been charged, and we have staff specifically hired by the city to work with applicants like yourself to come up with a design that meets the guidelines.
Sure.
It's not our charge to redesign the project here before you. Okay.
I understand that, and I appreciate your efforts. However, as you see, the 55 feet is a number which I think is pulled out of a hat, to be honest. I mean, it has some merit, but this is 56 feet wide and before it steps back. And I agree it has to be with the proportions of the house. And I don't think we over-exaggerated the massing of the house. That's a preference, and therefore I'd ask you for some guidance on the massing, the size, and the height of the house.
I think what has been said is that we, in our discussion, you hear the concerns that we have, ones that we think we could maybe accept. We can't say that all of us are going to agree. But I think the major things that one of them is the garage and opening on the front. That is something that in turn might affect the width of the house and may reduce it somewhat if in fact you came up with another solution. We can't sit here and say, this is what you have to do. What we're giving advice to staff is if we ask you to defer, that you work with staff. They have our direction on what we think needs to be done. And you work with staff to come up with a possible solution that we would accept when it brought before us again.
And I can to help the applicant with some guidance in terms of width and the design proper. It's not a redesign, but I think the appearance, the amount of setback and the appearance of the massing of the house, even though at the very front of it it's 56 feet wide, the minimal setback to the remainder of the house presents a front that is in fact, in my read, of a three-dimensional image from the street of the full 66 feet width. I think oftentimes we'll see additions, or we'll see something that is pushed back to maybe the midpoint of the house that appears you have one form and then this is recessed in the background. And I think for me, something that reads, if we're measuring frontage, that would be a specific comment in this case, is that the entire frontage appears to be the measurement here, and in form appears to be too wide for the lot, or nearly almost setback to setback. There is a drive that runs around, but that's what appears to be too massive. And again, my opinion and my read of this and my read of other historic forms or even infill projects in the neighborhood. You asked for specific guidance. Again, I think I'll reiterate that I think the front-loading garage is a non-starter for me. Even as artfully as it might be concealed, I think it's still a front-loading garage. How that is resolved, whether it can be on the same level, and how architecturally you treat that with there's some, to get in and make the turn, that definitely is going to, if there's not a front-loading garage, that's going to affect width and what the appearance of the house is, and certainly it'll affect your layout and the view to the backyard. And in turn, that will, I think that'll affect the appearance of the roof shape as well. Not necessarily that it'll be greater or less, but it won't. It'll give the house, I think, a different appearance if just those two things were done. I don't know that that's a redesign of the house, other than those are just specific comments of, if the garage goes away, some program element is going to infill that, or it will read maybe more as porte-cochere. And there are, I'm saying infinite, but there are multiple ways that could be addressed to do something differently and not have those two particular items, or that would address those two particular items specifically.
So just in real quick, just to recap, we really are, it has to be your decision, but if you choose to defer it and go on staff recommendations, and then based on the items that we feel like of the four that we would not feel favorably to, which were the width and the garage front facing. If you're willing to defer it, then we have given, we've deliberated and talked about enough information that staff could sit down with you and work through it. We all have a lot of confidence in your Preston. He's brought many things to here, and we know he can get there. But it has to be your decision if you want to defer it or not. And
can I just ask? Okay.
Sorry, I would just suggest that we don't imply that it's only those two items necessarily. You heard staff say that the
it's the entire bullets down there.
Also the roof form we heard staff express as one of their biggest concerns. I think we've given the applicant a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
The question for legal would be whether a deferral or a disapproval today changes their options from here on out. They could bring a redesigned project back to us if we simply vote to recommend staff, or to approve that staff recommendation. Is there an additional application fee? Is there time that they have to wait before they can resubmit? A deferral or a disapproval effectively is the same.
It's up to the applicant.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The only issue is if you all defer, then it would have to be the applicant's decision to defer, because you've got a time clock that's ticking on 30 days to make a decision or not. Effectively and substantively, there's really no difference, because if he goes back and redesigns it under a deferral, or if you decide today that you want to disapprove the project and he comes back with another project, there's no application fee, and I don't think there's a waiting period either, is there? Okay, so I think he would still be in the same position. And you're not under the time constraint. And neither is he. Right.
Make a motion.
Right. And if it's, you have 30 days to make a decision. So if your decision happens to be to approve or disapprove or whatever your decision, then that ends the clock right there. And he can take as long as he wants to come back with something that, is more in keeping with what the guidelines are suggesting.
I'd like to move we approve staff recommendation.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Susan jumped in right in the middle.
I want to make sure I understand. Are you approving staff's recommendation to disapprove, or approving staff's recommendation of approval with conditions? Just want to be clear.
To disapprove.
Okay, thank you.
Did Sam get that too? Okay.
And And I just want to clarify that the applicant understands that this simply means that same effect as a deferral, with the exception that we're not under the time constraints to make a decision. So that gives you more flexibility in terms of working with staff over the next few weeks. If you can get it worked out based on the comments that you've got and come to the next meeting, or whenever the next application period happens, then that's up to you. But so it's essentially there's no difference between disapproval today and deferral. It just takes away the time constraint.
I'm just waiting. Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. 1813 Blair Boulevard.
1813 Blair Boulevard is an application to demolish a non-contributing primary structure and an outbuilding, and to construct a new duplex infill and 2 one-story outbuildings. Staff is recommending approval of the demolition, but disapproval of the new construction. The existing house at 1813 Blair dates to about 1950. The structure's materials, form, detailing, and construction date are not consistent with the historic character of this part of the Belmont-Hillsborough overlay. The structure is therefore considered to be non-contributing, and its demolition meets the design guidelines. Also on the site is an outbuilding constructed in 2009 with a permit from MHCC. Its demolition also meets the design guidelines. You can see in the photo that the lot is steeply sloped from the front to the back. There's about a 20-foot difference in grade from the front to the back of the lot. Before I present the complete set of drawings, I just wanted to let the Commission know that the staff finds that the submitted drawings are not sufficient for adequate review and approval of an application for new infill and outbuildings. The drawings do not have the major measurements called out, and key information on the drawings are obscured by plants and other landscape features. In addition, there are some discrepancies between the drawings for certain key measurements. Lastly, the submitted drawings seem to be a poor copy of the original drawings, which has made deciphering some key information difficult. Staff is recommending disapproval of the project because of the poor quality of the drawings. However, that's not the only reason that staff is recommending disapproval.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? Sure. Is the applicant for this project here?
I don't think he is here.
Or represent.
Seeing that there's no one here to represent this project, I wonder if you would like the full presentation, or if it might be best to simply ask the applicant for drawings that we can fully review.
Well, would it be, does that mean it's deferred, or was that?
That would mean it's a disapproval.
So we need to go ahead and take a.
We would need to do that, yes.
Yeah, just let her finish, and then we'll go through with it.
I'll try and go as quickly as possible and abbreviate, because I know it's...
There may be people in the audience that want to talk about it, too. You never know.
Okay. So here's the site plan. Staff finds that it meets the base zoning setbacks, and that the front setback meets the design guidelines. Here's the front facade. Again, the quality is not great. Staff finds that the overall form meets the design guidelines. The roof slope is a 512. Typically, we like to see a 612, but with the deep overhangs and slightly lower hip roof, they're going for a prairie style, which is found in the district. Staff found that the height is within the range of the heights in the immediate context. Here is the side facade. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back to the front facade. There are some issues that staff has about the balconies on the second floor. They are covered second-story balconies, which is almost like a two-story porch, and staff finds that does not meet the design guidelines. Let's see. Oh, and also the dormer is out of scale with what is typically seen on structures. It's not set down from the ridge of the house, and it's not set back from the wall below, and it's also 17 feet wide, which is much wider than what you typically see. On the side facades, our concerns are primarily the window opening pattern. There just are not enough window openings for a wall, for this amount of wall space. Also, on the second story, the kind of large, I'm not even clear if that's a window or a door going out to the balcony, but that just does not meet the design guidelines either, because typically you don't see large doors like that on a second story. here's the rear facade. Again, the drawings for the garage. The garages it was kind of hard to decipher their height and overall appropriateness. Their footprint does seem to be appropriate. In total, the two garages are about 828 square feet. It's 2 bays for one garage and 1 bay for the other garage. And here's a perspective drawing. Because of the steep slope of the lot, the applicant is proposing to have retaining walls kind of stepping up. We just didn't have enough information to really assess if those types of retaining walls were appropriate. And then here are some context photos looking down Blair Boulevard. You can see that there are a lot of very tall, very wide houses in the immediate vicinity, and that this one does seem to fall within the range of width, scale, and height. But in conclusion, we are recommending disapproval, one, because of the drawing. We're recommending approval of the demolition, but we're recommending disapproval of the new construction of the infill and the outbuildings, finding that the drawings are insufficient, that the front dormer, second-story porches, and window openings on the side facade do not meet the design guidelines. And the applicant is not here. I said that I would bring back any feedback to him. I believe he intends to resubmit, depending upon your vote, but he intends to resubmit based on comments today for the June meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Melissa? Okay. Open public hearing. Would anybody like to speak regarding this project? Okay, close public hearing. Motion?
Well, I just have one comment first. I guess I'm struggling with if one of the reasons is for disapproval is that the drawings are insufficient to adequately describe the project, then doesn't that mean the application's incomplete and we shouldn't even have it before us?
Yes, that's a very good question. There's a fine line. Once we receive a complete application, a decision has to be made within a certain number of days, or the project's automatically approved. And so we had all the pieces, and we just didn't want to take the chance that someone would make the argument that it was a complete application. And so that's why it's before you today.
Susan, do you think that's, what I was planning to do is make a motion that the application's incomplete and not waste any time trying to provide input to somebody that couldn't put together a full package. But I want to make sure that it also doesn't set us up for someone to come back and say it was a full package.
I tend to agree with Robin that probably in an abundance of caution, a disapproval would be cleaner. And the reason is because someone, if you have all of the pieces and it's based on the quality of the information that you have been provided and they have technically complied with your requirements, this may be a more it's maybe a more conservative view, but it may be a more prudent course of action to protect the board.
That would then allow this project to be decided by lawyers in terms of a complete application, and if they won, the time frame would have been by, and this is what we would get. Is that true?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
He's saying
You're putting down lawyers.
I'm not. What I'm saying is that, to the credit of the staff, if the completeness of the application is not for us or the staff to determine, if they took issue with that would be decided by lawyers, and it would not appear before us at any point because it would be approved.
Assuming that it's appealed. That's correct, assuming that it's appealed.
But the staff did give a lot of good things to look at. So I think we can get a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the demolition of the primary and accessory structure that currently exists, and also approve staff's recommendation to disapprove the proposed new infill because it does not meet sections 2B1, E, F, G, and I.
Second. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. The next one is 1510 Cedar Lane.
All right. 1510 Cedar Lane. This is a contributing house in the Belmont-Hillsborough Neighborhood Conservation Zoning Overlay. And it's an application to remove an existing screened porch addition on the side of the house that was built in 2007, and to construct a new screened porch in its place, and also to construct an outbuilding. For both of those pieces, there is a requirement of a setback determination. The addition will tie into the right side of the house in much the same way as the existing porch, which is at the top of this site plan. But the new porch will be 4 feet wider than the existing porch, and that extends to within 3 feet of the right side property line. A side addition for this house is appropriate. For several additions, because the house is 70 feet, or the lot is 70 feet wide, the house is askew on the lot, and the width of the addition is set back sufficiently from the house. However, this particular addition would encroach on the 5-foot setback that bulk zoning requires. Under Metro Code Section 17.40.410, this commission does have the authority to determine and approve construction with setbacks that deviate from the bulk zoning setbacks when it's appropriate, but staff doesn't find that a setback reduction or determination of a shorter setback is justified here. And in fact, widening the structure further constricts the space between buildings, which it partly is due to the addition to the adjacent house that was approved in 2012. So essentially, there's room for an addition, but not so far as to reduce the setback. The walls of the addition, essentially it's a screened porch, so it's wood posts and screen. The specific material of a chimney on the porch and the roof is not known, but those materials can be approved administratively. The height and location just forward of the rear of the house is very similar to the existing addition, and that is appropriate. So essentially with the condition that the porch is reduced in width so that it doesn't encroach on the setback, staff finds that this porch would meet the design guidelines. The outbuilding would be a 1.5-story garage with bonus area above. The building would have a 550 square foot footprint and would be located behind the house 4 feet from the left side of the property, which does meet the side setbacks, and 8 feet from the rear of the property. That also encroaches on the rear setback, but this is actually a situation where staff finds that the shorter setback is more in keeping with the historic character of the neighborhood, which you can see there, the 1951 Sanborn had a outbuilding in this exact same location very close to the alley. So staff found that that shorter setback was appropriate for the garage. The roof of the building would be an asymmetrical gable with a 12-12 pitch and a ridge at 25 feet above grade. The height pretty much just matches the original house. It's a little taller than an earlier addition. However, the pitch is much steeper than the original pitch on the house. The house has an 8-12 pitch. Staff finds that a lower pitch, which would also reduce the height of the garage, would be more appropriate, and that would be compatible and meets guidelines 2B1A and 2B1E. The materials of the garage are cement fiber siding, shingle roof. These are appropriate, but staff would have to approve the windows and doors. There's a shot of the existing porch and the space between the two houses. Staff recommends approval of the side porch addition and the new outbuilding with a rear setback determination for the garage or for the outbuilding, with conditions that the width of the addition is reduced so that it meets the existing or the current standard setbacks, 5 feet, and that the materials of the chimney and roof of the addition are approved by staff, and also that the pitch of the outbuilding roof shall be lowered to match that of the historic house, and also windows and doors approved by staff. Meeting those conditions, staff finds that this application meets the design guidelines.
Any questions to Sean?
Just one question. There's this open air connector between the house and the garage.
Yes, codes, and this commission has approved that a number of times in the past with obviously a stipulation that it remain open. If that were to be enclosed, or if it were proposed to be enclosed, that would make it an attached garage, throw
Okay,
setbacks.
so we've done that a number of times as long as it has to remain open and
when
there's no second
it's
floor.
essentially narrow and open on the sides.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Would the applicant like to come forward and speak regarding this project?
Hey, I'm Hunter Connolly, and I'm the resident at 1510 Cedar. So thanks for your time and contemplating this, and I hope this one isn't as gut-wrenching as a lot of the ones that are before you today. But I think our, in terms of the side setback with our neighbor, there's an existing privacy fence along the side where we're going to be building that, and even with the 3 feet, it still leaves enough room to walk and utilize the space, kind of similar to as we are now. The I guess the hardship that I'm asking for is to allow what is an existing non-functional porch to be widened to the point where we could have a fireplace and kind of enough seating for what's a relatively large family to enjoy the side porch off of our living room. And I do have an email from my neighbor right next door saying, from Ed Foote, he's at 1506 Cedar, saying, I live next door, I share the property line with the Conleys, I fully agree with the Conleys' plan and have no objections to the lessened distance. So hopefully with that, and I'll let Blaine speak to kind of the roof height and some of the reasons behind that, but my goal is not to be a problem, but also I'd really like to have a porch that's on the side and functional, and I think this is a good design that that will not detract from the commission's goals. So.
Hi, my name is Blaine Bonadise. I live at 1606 Linden. I am the architect for the project. In relation to this green porch, to reiterate Hunter's concern, his hardship really is that he looked at a plan, signed off on a plan, and the honest answer is that it just wasn't large enough to function as a screen porch. So it's sort of become, a catch-all for bikes and the like, and there's really not enough room to put a seating setting and walk back and forth in that screen porch. That's all I have to say about that. Can you hand these out for me?
Would you like some, is this additional information?
Yes, additional information. In relation to the roof pitch change, I have created 2 drawings which show on the left what we've proposed as the front elevation and what we propose and what changing that pitch would do to that front elevation. We met with staff a month and a half ago, and we're sort of encouraged to turn the gable ends towards the neighbors and create the roof slope that pitches towards the front of the property so as to diminish its massing from the front. So the roof actually falls away from you as you're standing at the front of the property. It is quite a ways back from the front of the house. It is, in fact, shorter than the original house. It's slightly bigger than the addition that was done, I think, in 2007. But the original house, conservatively speaking, is at least 2 to 6 feet below that. We got a tape measure as high as we could go with a 24-foot tape, and we still had a few to go. So we were estimating the height of that original house roof ridge The garage does not exceed 25 feet. The comment about matching the pitch of the original house, I think, in my understanding, historically speaking, outbuildings didn't match per se the principal buildings. In other words, they weren't little miniature replicas of the building. And I think to have a different pitch, something that's, whimsical or different, is not inappropriate, quite honest. In that sense, it has the feeling that it sort of organically grew out of the need for some, particular function. I think that the garage can certainly distinguish itself, yet still be complementary, and it does not impede any cohesiveness of the property in relation to its architecture. The way that we have it drawn, it looks more like a story and a half as opposed to a two-story structure. With the 12 and 12 pitch, we've been able to pull that eave way down so that there's less room above the garage door. And we feel like it gives it a much more human scale if we do that. As you can see, when we change the pitch of the roof, it pulls those eaves up and creates a taller first floor wall. In the building section, you can see when we get to the top of the stair, we have a plate height there of 6 feet 8 inches just to the right of that door, which is minimum per code. So we've brought that roof form as low as we possibly can once we get to the top of those stairs in order to enter and exit the second floor. I think those were the only two issues that staff had.
Yeah, with the exception of the materials be approved. So yeah, and I know that's no problem. Okay, so the width and the pitch, and you have made one stab at the pitch already here. Basically.
I'm sorry?
This is a different pitch, right?
The one on the left is what we've submitted.
Yeah.
And the one on the right is with a lower pitch, as staff suggested.
Okay, I understand. The people was throwing me off.
It's an analogy to a tall, thin, vertically oriented character with a long, skinny tie and a jacket and a belt that's in an appropriate location, as opposed to the character on the right, which his belt is hoisted way up and he's short-shirted and, would be wearing more of a bow tie, if you will, in the right-hand version.
We'll all be looking like
I look like that now.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Any questions to architect?
I do have Blaine, I've got a question. With regard to the side screen porch, it looks from the orientation, and this may be very minimal, but with the house askew, you're going from a 3-foot and it recedes and then kind of stair steps back out to, I'm assuming, 3 feet and then comes out. At what distance what's the greatest distance where the table is that it gets to? Do you pick up a foot there from the property line, or do you pick up a 1.5 feet, 6 inches, 8 inches?
It's in the plan. I think it might be 18 to 20 inches. We basically snugged it up to that 3 foot and maximized that.
Okay.
I believe that there's a plan and a seating arrangement as well.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at that. The information I'm missing is how that, it's not like it's 3 feet all the way along the askewed property line,
No, at one point it might be 3.4, 3.6.
So it's not as if it goes from 3 to 5. It's in the 3 to 4 foot range as it stair steps back there.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant or the architect?
Just clarity here on this drawing here. the site plan, actually, architectural site plan. So it's 3 foot on one side. Is the other one 4 foot then? Is it, so there's not both sides that have the setback, it's just one side?
We're only asking for the variance on the one side. Staff has approved the reduced
The other
setback
side.
for the garage based on its appropriateness and the Sanborn map that he showed you earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Staff is recommending approval of the side setback and the rear setback,
We have not made any approvals. Those are simply
Right.
recommendations.
but for the outbuilding, there's 2 setback variances on it.
Actually, with a structure of this size, the side setback for an outbuilding would be 3 feet. So they're well in compliance of that with the
So
4 that they're
both
proposing.
rear and side setback variances, staff's recommending approval because it's consistent with the pattern of other outbuildings.
Outbuilding, yes.
But it's the primary structure, 5-foot setback variance that you're recommending disapproval. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Blaine. You're welcome. Open public hearing. Anyone that would like to speak against this project, please come forward. Okay. Seeing none, anyone would like to speak for this project, come forward. Okay, close public hearing. Discussion.
Can you remind me what the side setback should be? It's getting late.
I think the question was
5 feet.
5 feet. Was it? Okay.
For me, when we talk about setback reductions, when we do it with outbuildings and they're in their historic location in the rear, I think it's a lot easier to just say that makes a lot of sense, that fits a historic pattern. When we start to do it in the side setbacks, I feel like there needs to be some reason. And I know we haven't allowed it a number of times, and we have allowed it in other cases. I don't know that I guess I didn't hear a hardship reason other than I want more room. That's sort of where I am.
Blaine, can you tell me, this might have already been said and I missed it, on the front corner of the side porch, what's the distance there between the property line?
3 feet.
So it's 3 feet all the way, even though it's skewed?
Well, it goes from 3 to
I
a
got
little
you.
bit more
Okay.
than 3, back to 3.
Right, okay.
Other discussion? Any discussion about the pitch?
You know, on the pitch, so often applications are coming in with too low of a pitch relative to, the historic context or the primary structure, and so this is sort of the opposite. So, and I don't necessarily find it inappropriate with the style of the primary structure. I think it's tastefully done. Could it be the same pitch as the house and maybe even look different than this and be okay? I think so, but I'm not sure. I think the roof pitch is inappropriate. I think the point that was made is probably true that most outbuildings don't necessarily historically didn't necessarily match the primary structure, and I think this is well done and isn't out of character with the neighborhood or the primary structure itself.
Additional comment to that is that it's not really facing, when you don't see it from the street, the pitch goes this way towards the back instead of a facade.
Gable.
Yeah, to the gable. Does that yes? Makes sense, yeah. So you're not going to see the difference of the pitch drastically from the front.
It's in regards to the side porch, had the house not sort of been, I guess, juxtaposed this way, if you will. I'm pretty sure that they could have been successful in meeting the setback. But it is what it is. I'm not bothered at all by the 2 feet encroachment, the 2-foot encroachment. Sean, can we see the picture of the current deck that's attached to that house, please? Sorry to make you get up.
No problem. Thought I had another one in there, but obviously not.
That's good.
There is a balcony that looks like on the side that's sort of in front of it that
do we know how
might have used to have stairs.
Do we know how far out that protrudes currently, that deck that I'm looking at?
I don't. Maybe Blaine does. Or the owner.
Okay.
Yeah, when we purchased the house, it was an upstairs, downstairs duplex, and so when we converted it back to a single family, that was where the stair had gone up, and so we took the stair off and just kind of left the...
Well, what I'm getting at is how far from the setback are you with this
It will cover
stair?
most all, just because of the way the property line skews. You can kind of see the flags kind of on the right side there. Those flags are kind of close to the property line, and so as it fans out, the existing porch there does kind of cover what will be the new porch. And
good, thanks.
How much wider is the addition than the porch, existing porch?
I believe it's about 2.5 feet or so.
Okay.
Not much. Maybe, actually, I think there might be a drawing that shows kind of an old or an existing
No,
line
this
of
was
porch, in the
lacking
plan.
of an outline for the existing. The floor plan in Metro Records for the tax assessor showed it as 10 feet.
We're asking for about 2 feet additional to make that 12-foot, which is kind of that magic number for negotiating furniture and such.
It's really important, 2 feet.
In terms of, excuse me, granting side setbacks, this one does sit back, beyond 50% of the house. In fact, it almost sits back to the original one. I'm not, this case notwithstanding, sometimes I think because we don't look at floor plans, or at least we're not intended to, that oftentimes compelling arguments are made on things that were not necessarily relevant. And so I'm a bit hesitant to grant a side setback variance on just purely on convenience of furniture layout, but I could be compelled otherwise if an argument I think were made for it for some other reason other than furniture layout.
I'm going to give you a reason. And it's not anything technical. I think the plans are visually compatible with the primary residence and with the character of the historic neighborhood surrounding it. I think they're well done, and I think for that reason that it should be approved. As drawn, as presented by the architect and the owner here. That's my opinion.
Is that an opinion or a motion?
I'll make it a motion.
Okay. Okay.
Is the motion clear?
So you're making a motion of approval with the width as shown on the drawings?
Without the staff.
Consistent with the presentation made by the architect here.
Okay. And
Are you including things like the windows and doors approval, materials, and all of that?
The conditions.
Correct.
okay, so the other conditions, that they meet the other conditions?
Yes.
Discussion, I guess we better get if we have a second out there.
Second.
Okay, now discussion.
I think we just need to clarify. There's 4 recommended conditions, Rose.
Yes.
We'll start at the bottom. The bottom one is the windows and doors of the outbuilding be approved by staff.
Yes. When I started my comments, you asked for a motion, so let me clarify the motion. Would you like that?
Sure. That'd be great.
Would that be good?
Sure.
So we'll have it clear?
Okay.
Okay. With regard to the application at 1510 Cedar Lane, I move approval of the staff recommendation, approval of the side porch addition, the new outbuilding, the rear setback determination, with the condition that the windows and the doors of the outbuilding be approved by the staff. The pitch will be consistent with the presentation made by the architect here in this hearing, and that the materials of the brick and roof of the addition be approved by the staff. The width of the addition shall be consistent with the presentation made by the architect in this hearing, and that's my motion.
Thank you, Rose and Hunter.
I'm sorry, could I ask for further clarification? There were a couple of different presentations by the architect, and I want to know for sure which one.
So, could I maybe help?
Please help.
I think I understand your intent. The motion is to approve staff recommendation with 2 conditions. The windows and doors of the outbuilding be approved by staff, and the materials of the brick and roof of the addition be approved by staff. And to clarify, eliminating the first condition and the third condition that have to do with the side setback of the addition and the change in the roof slope. Is that?
That's what I was trying to say. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Planning Person.
I'm sorry to ask a question, but when we are talking about the outbuilding as presented, are we talking about the skinny tie or the bow tie?
I think the skinny.
You mean on the persons?
Okay. So we have a motion. We can still keep the second, right? We just had it clarified. All right. Did you have some more discussion, Hunter?
Yeah, I just have a question for staff or for Susan. Side setbacks or setbacks in general. For some reason, I seem to remember that these are. I don't know if we have less discretion or that there needs to be some hardship established or that the variance would be consistent with the existing context. Otherwise, I don't know if we have, the question would be, I guess, have we approved other side setback variances for any other reasons outside of its consistency with the neighborhood or some sort of hardship?
And we'll answer that jointly. The code sets out in 174410, subsection C5, that the Historic Zoning Commission shall make the following determinations with respect to historic overlays. Number 5, the appropriateness of the maximum size of buildings and structures on a lot and the buildable area within which a building can be located, including setbacks and height. So that's your initial authority to look at this. It's my understanding that the board has also adopted a policy to go into more detail as to when it would be appropriate, and I'm going to let Robin talk a little bit about that.
And then to meet that, in 2007, you adopted a policy for when you would allow for setback determinations, reductions. And it's the existing setback of the contributing building already really doesn't meet the setbacks. We had, I think, one of those last month. Setbacks of like structures are found on historic maps. That's why you routinely allow for garages to not meet the setbacks, because they usually were very close to rear lot lines. The shape of the lot might be one. If it's a triangular shaped lot, unusually shaped. If there's no alley access, proximity of adjoining structures and property lines. Again, if it's an unusually shaped lot. Those are the reasons you outlined for when to allow for it.
Okay. I mean, like Sam, I don't really have a problem with this. I mean, it seems like a reasonable request. If I own the house, I'd probably want to do the same thing. Though I'm not sure I've heard a good case for why we would do it here. And it brings up, anecdotally, I've got some neighbors that if ever they become before us, I'll probably recuse myself, but that have built a side structure, and it went over the side setback, and the adjacent neighbor is really upset about it. Well, the adjacent neighbor also wants to violate the side setback with a side porch, very similar to this, and so he was asking my advice, but so there's a lot of, I think there's probably a lot of opportunity for people to violate that side setback to increase the livability of the home, which is sort of the purpose here, which is
it's a good reason, but I don't think it helps us much.
Right.
I wonder if, in this case, if we want to approve that because it's further back, it's understandable. I wonder if, in addition to oddly shaped lots, we do have a condition here that a historic structure is not oriented. The front of it is not oriented parallel to the front property line. It sits a little jagged, which essentially creates the same condition as having an irregularly shaped lot, and that's sort of why they step in as they come up. That's the best reason I can come up with. I'm really hesitant to approve it without some reason that distinguishes it from anybody anywhere saying, I want it, because that's going to cause neighbor wars.
Well, we do have a motion and a second, and if there's more discussion, we can do it, obviously, but...
May I ask this? Could I amend my motion after it's seconded to include the comments that were just made by Mr. Kahlberg down there, that it's an irregularly shaped lot, it has some unique features to this lot that would distinguish it for this setback?
Okay, we have an amended motion, and I assume are you okay with the seconding?
I am. That was my reasoning as well.
Okay.
Because of the way the house sits on the lot.
Are you about to?
Who's amending the motion?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay, so you amended your own? Okay.
Yes, I did.
Very good. All right, thanks.
Okay. Let's just go ahead.
My own. Let's proceed.
Yeah, let's go. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, 3618 Westbrook Avenue.
Thank you for compelling me to be able to say.
I called it before.
Okay.
Just to willy-nilly say, yeah, it's kind of like, what the,
Last one.
yeah, I didn't need it. Thank you very much for that. I just willy-nilly just posted motions.
This last case today, the house at 3618 Westbrook Avenue is a contributing house in the Richland West End overlay. The house, as you see here, is a 1.5-story bungalow. And some of you may recall it was enlarged with a sizable addition last year. It was approved last year and actually just finished construction, or maybe even is still in construction, which included a basement level 2-car garage, and that's the left side elevation there. But this current application is to construct a new outbuilding at the rear of the lot. The new building would have a footprint size of 1,248 square feet, and the footprint of that conditioned area of the historic house prior to the addition was only 1,160 square feet. Other outbuildings in the area vary in size, but the average is about 740 square feet. This outbuilding, the proposed outbuilding, would also have a 560 square foot upper story, giving it a total conditioned space or enclosed space of 1,808 square feet. The form of the building, it will have a asymmetrical salt box type roof with a gable height of nearly 25 feet from grade, with a ridge running front to back. The actual height from grade is taller than the historic house, but the lot drops significantly towards the rear, so the perceived height would actually be less than what's shown just on elevations. The materials will include cement fiber lap siding and stucco fiber cement board and batten, which are appropriate materials for new construction. Even with the drop in grade, staff finds that the scale of the outbuilding is not subordinate and the form is not compatible with the historic house. In combination with the addition, staff finds the amount of new construction overwhelms the historic house, and that this begins to negatively impact the historic character of the neighborhood. Staff recommends disapproval of this new construction of an outbuilding, finding that the height and scale of the building does not meet Section 2B1H of the Richland West End Neighborhood Conservation Zoning Design Guidelines. Did you get public comment? There was an email to me from a neighbor in opposition. I forwarded it to Robin. I think it got sent along.
Thank you. Any questions for Sean? All right. Thanks, Sean. Is the applicant and architect would like to come forward and say your name and address?
Yeah. That's easy to leave. These are support and I'm sorry?
Is this a different design or the same design?
There's the original alternate before we changed it here, but if we...
They have an alternative design. Is that something you'd like to see?
An alternative design that you guys hadn't seen yet?
I think it's one we saw initially.
It was the initial design, and it's in response to the comment of that.
So you guys have seen it before?
We didn't review it fully, but we have seen it.
Well, I don't want to continue. It's the same footprint in that. I just went to a singular form.
Pass it around.
Well, in addition, we've got comments of that.
You can pass it around.
Photos and some other projects.
You can pass it around.
No.
What else is being passed around?
Letters of support.
Oh, okay. You can go ahead.
Hi, my name's Steve Wilson. I currently live at 3606 Westbrook Avenue and have a contract to buy this house, 3618, on the same street in Richland. I've lived on Westbrook for the last 7 years, and our current home has an outbuilding behind our house that's 1,100 square feet with an attached carport. The building was there, the outbuilding was there before I moved in, but we added the carport, which was approved with historical. We're moving down the street because this house is twice the size of our house, and we have a growing family who needs room to grow and loves our neighborhood and our street. And while this new house definitely suits our needs in terms of size and number of bedrooms, it lacks a basement for storage or an attic. Our current outbuilding at 3606 where I live has been great for the extra storage and for small home office. So we were hoping to recreate that down the street at the new house. The sale of this new house is actually contingent on the outbuilding being approved. I feel that the massing in this proposed design is in proportion to the new house and suits the needs of a four-person family living in a modern 3,900 square foot home. I also think it's appropriate considering the size of other outbuildings in our area. 4 houses down from here, there's an outbuilding that's 980 square feet, in addition to mine on the same street, which is 1133. The building will also create a visual block from the railroad, which is directly behind the house, across from the alley. We've shown these plans to our surrounding neighbors and passed around these letters of approval and other signatures, including all the houses next door and directly across the street. We feel it will enhance the property while staying within the historical tradition of the Richland West End area that we love, and I think it suits the needs of a family in 2014, living in a house this size in a historical neighborhood. And appreciate your time. I think my architect is here to help explain the other details. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here real quick, if I may. I may have misunderstood, but I understood you to say you did not want to see the alternative plan. Is that correct?
No, it's okay.
Okay, because it was attached. I thought that was just letters of support I was handing out.
No, that's okay. You can come up, Mitch, if you were going to say something too.
Good afternoon. My name is Mitch Hodge. I'm the architect on this project. And I'm working, as Steve had said, they have a similar size structure a few doors down. They're looking at buying this house. That structure also has a 3-car carport attached to it that was approved. It was done while the overlay was in place. There's several things about this site that makes it unique. I understand concerns about footprints of garages. Most lots are about 50 by 150, and a lot of people are building 2-story garages and that basically fill up the whole yard. This lot is significantly larger. It's 60 by 208 feet. It backs up to probably the most remote alley in Nashville. You have to go several blocks down the street and turn at a dead end. And that alley runs along a railroad track, and it dead ends at Murphy Road. I think there's about 4 houses beyond their house. So it's not traveled at all. The other side of the alley from his house is actually, there's probably it looks like about 100-foot right-of-way. There's a large railway berm there that's about 12 feet tall. So in addition to that, the topography of the lot, Westbrook sits about 9 feet above where the garage will be sitting. So it sits, basically the garage will be sitting down in a holler there. It sits downhill from the house, and beyond that, across the alley is a large railroad berm. So we think the massing, it's not going to be very visible. As you can see in the photos as well, there's a porte-cochere there the historic house takes up pretty much a full width of that. We've gone through the design, and I had done an initial design which had a cross gable. We had the original house is a 512 pitch, so that's what we had to work with. I tried to do a cross gable design to make the house, just to bring the massing down, and one of Sean's comments was make it a 1.5 story, which I interpreted as more of a singular roof form, and that's what's brought to you today, just a singular roof form. But I have in the photos there, you can see the initial design, what we were trying to do. So as I said, given the topography, the size of the lot, we feel that this garage, is compatible in size and, scale with the neighborhood. Still leaves plenty of green space in the yard. Another comment, which I understand there's bulk zoning there, was reducing the 20-foot setback. Again, this is not an alley there that is your typical alley where it's basically 15 feet between 2 lots. It's very remote. There's a large railroad track back there, so it's a super wide alley. So I think actually letting the garage be 10 feet closer to the alley helps the neighborhood by shifting the building back further away from the street and, again, reducing the visibility. So we just ask for approval on this. Thank you.
Any questions to Mitch, the architect?
Can I also comment?
Sure.
I've also included 2 other designs in the back. I noticed on the agenda there are 2 garages similar in size. One garage is actually a foot wider. It's on the very back. I'm not picking on one particular person, but there's one garage that's a foot wider in footprint than ours, and there's the other garage that's a full 2 stories on there, and those are on fairly flat lots. But they've been on the consent agenda today, so this one falls somewhere in between those 2.
Mitch, can you, I know there was when, of course, you've got a new homeowner coming in to this situation, but I do know there was some considerable concern, some more concern among commission members, some commission members and others, just on the size of the addition of the original house. Again, you come to this brand new and
right. He wasn't involved in the addition, right?
However, we were, and as commissioners, and I'm curious, and this maybe the applicant can speak to this. There is a garage, which was maybe part of. It was leftover space, but I think the size of the addition certainly on the house certainly had something to do with the form and size that it took. You know, instead of utilizing the basement maybe as walkout space and making the addition 1 story shorter, there's a full-on garage under there, and so I'm curious as to the use of a house with 2 garages.
No, I agree. I wish the garage could have been a basement. There is no basement, so thus the need for storage. There's also no attic because it's built to the rafters. So
Sure.
We love the house, but it's just closets, which I think was a misstep in the design. But that's, yeah.
Could you clarify? There's no basement. I mean,
there's a crawl space.
There's a garage and there's windows all along that facade.
There's a crawl space below is what you're seeing in the front, which is.
Are you talking within the original house?
Well, I'm just looking at the side elevation, and there's
just a garage.
Underneath the.
Yeah, that's a 2-car garage.
Yeah, the addition is garage, and there's a stairwell there.
Yeah.
There is a garage there.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
The white thing.
Yeah.
Right.
No, the garage is at the back of the house.
But
Yeah.
there's-
Yeah, I understand what the garage is.
Oh, the windows.
The windows
Yeah.
towards the street, that's not basement?
That's dirt. It's one of those funky, half
just
dirt based.
Just air vents.
Just
yeah.
a crawl space.
Okay, for now, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Open public hearing. Anyone that'd like to speak against this project, please come forward now and state your name and address. Seeing none, anyone that'd like to speak for this project? Okay, close public hearing. Discussion.
I am a little confused. This is where the confusion is about if approved, staff recommends. This setback statement, can you just clarify what it's actually saying?
We'll tag team this. Mr. Alexander can clarify that. But just to explain that part again, a few months ago, we had a recommendation for disapproval, and the commission approved the project. But there were a lot of things we didn't know about the project, for instance, materials. And so to avoid that happening again in the future, because it was approved without any conditions, we added conditions. In case you absolutely disagreed and you felt like it should be approved, then you have some conditions to consider. That's why, and again, thanks for asking about that, that's why that's in there. We can quit doing that if it's confusing. We just didn't want to have approvals without any conditions at all, because there may be concerns if approved. And I'll let Mr. Alexander take the second half.
Yeah, I like the idea. It was confusing to me as well at first, but now that I understand why you're doing it, I think it's very helpful and a good reminder to not perhaps do what happened the one time that drove this.
Just realize, though, we'll probably approve more because you've given us thing how to approve it, but that's fine.
Okay, so let me just restate that, and not that you have to explain that. I think it's the way this sentence is written. I'm a little confused. Approve, let me just read it. Approve the requested rear setback determination of 10 feet or require a 20-foot rear setback. Which is the appropriate setback? What is the normal setback? 20 or 10?
Because of the size of the structure, it doesn't meet the standard accessory setback, which would be 20 feet off the rear property line and 5 feet from either side.
So it's 20 foot.
It is. It's 20 foot.
Okay.
It's options again.
So
Either it should be 20 feet or you could approve the reduced setback at 10.
So our recommendation is not for approval with conditions. It was for disapproval. But if the commission sees fit to approve it, those are considerations, since, our recommendation is for disapproval. If you accept that recommendation, there are no conditions that go along with it. So those, if you were to craft your own motion, those are conditions that you might want to put as a part of that motion.
Are we under discussion now?
We are.
Okay, so I'm just continue on that 20 foot and 10 foot. On that rear of the lot, if I understand to read this, there is a railroad in the back, correct? So would that setback be actually make a difference in terms of its intent? Like if there was a alley back there or another piece of property?
And then
There is an alley, and then you're 10 foot back from the alley.
Right. So, I mean, in terms of determining whether a 20 or a 10-foot setback would be appropriate.
There's not houses behind there,
Right.
so that I can see your point.
Okay.
I'd be curious what people think about if this was all proposed as one project, which I think is sort of the way that Sean analyzed it, that the garage is already there. I wonder, do we typically make people choose one or the other when they're coming in, if this was all in front of you at one time?
It's hard to speculate on that. We would review an application for what it is. In this case, there is an addition there. Whether or not it had a garage, it still functions potentially as a 3-story addition with 1,000 square foot footprint. So that's essentially a 3,000 square foot addition. And then, like I said, the amount of new construction with an 1,800 square foot garage, yes, it's a large lot, but that's a lot of new in relation to a fairly standard 1.5 story Craftsman bungalow.
Sean, could I ask a question? And just kind of goes back to their statement about trying to respond to some of your questions to make the singles, change the slope of the roof or maybe the roof form, I guess. Where were you trying to do that to kind of help reduce the mass? Is that why that comment was made?
Yes.
The perception of the mass?
Yeah, if you look at the site section plan from the applicant's submittal, well, that's obviously the current plan, but what was first proposed was a 1-story footprint with something sort of like an airplane dormer with having the 2nd-story portion, a second 2-story outbuilding with, it had a 1,200 square foot footprint and the configurations were different, but the numbers were pretty much the same. So the comments were reduce the scale, and this means reduce the height, bring 2-story down to 1.5-story is probably a very good way to reduce the height. Also, reducing the footprint. Maybe there's some numbers there, like 1,000 square feet is still really big, but it's maybe more in keeping with some of the other things that staff has approved or would feel comfortable approving. But just that the 1,250 square foot was very large for an outbuilding.
Thanks. Any comments? Any other comments?
You know, I think the point about the size of the lot and the distance from the historic home and the topography and the railroad tracks and the berm in the back, all of that does make this a different condition than most of our 150-foot by 50-foot lots around town. And so, you know, it's somewhat relative here, and the massing here doesn't. I think it is. Well, it's a big outbuilding. I still think it's subordinate to the existing structure, especially with the topography. You know, it sits down low, and I think the architect's done a good job to give it that 1.5 story feel versus a 2-story. I think, and you know, the roof form doesn't necessarily bother me, but I understand what the staff's saying in terms of it not being sort of consistent with the style of the existing building. And I think the rear setback variance here is fine, given other outbuilding locations relative to alleys in the neighborhood. Makes sense. So I could be compelled to approve this with only the condition of staff reviewing all materials, frankly.
When we talk about, I mean, if this had been submitted with the original addition, and I mean, we talk about the massing compared to the existing structure. Now, this existing structure is huge, but I'm looking back at the original significant part of the historic contributing structure. I mean, now we're considering all of it as being as a total. I just think it's an awfully big structure. And would we even be considering that size if it came in with the addition?
Is that a question?
Yeah, it is a question.
Well, I think looking at the downstairs, and in the project standing on its own merits, I mean, certainly the previous addition has something to do with it, but I want to maybe consider the garage on its own merits. Essentially, it's a 4-car garage on the ground floor. Even though the use of it might not be 4 cars, it's a 4-car garage. I mean, in terms of size, you could fit 4 cars in there. And there is additional floor plan space. If I'm looking at this correctly, there's additional floor plan space upstairs. I think that's the real consideration here. Is this a typical situation or scenario that we would want to see repeated on other lots? Each project is considered on its own merits, and I think that this is up against the railroad and the rear setback. I certainly have some deference to that. I don't know that you take fewer adjoining properties that a setback reduction, you basically have on the left and right side, that it would potentially influence and affect, which is much less than as many as, 6 across the way diagonally and so forth that other projects might. So that, to me, I guess, is a real question in terms of the footprint, the overall footprint of the outbuilding and the total square footage.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with setback. It's the
Scale.
Any other comments about the scale, maybe?
I share Ann's issue with the scale. That's the only comment that it's just, I'm not sure if I don't know whether I was on the commission when this was initially approved, but I have a problem with the scale.
I'm sorry, go ahead. And in line with that, in scale, I know that in these outbuildings or accessory structures, in the past, the square footage hasn't been this large, if I can recall. It's maybe been 700, or I see that figure a lot. So we have questioned that size in the past. So this is definitely questionable for it to be this size.
I have similar concerns about the size. I acknowledge a lot of the mitigating factors that Hunter outlined, and think a lot of that is persuasive. But I still come back to the fact you've basically got a small house with a garage in the backyard of a gigantic house with an attached 2-car garage. It's sort of 2 houses more than an outbuilding. It just seems like it's too much, and a lot of the massing for the property seems to already been utilized on the first project.
Is there any other discussion about the roof form? No. So the main, the main thing is just the scale. Looks like it's kind of one of the things that I think everyone has a little bit of an issue with.
I'll throw out a motion.
There we go.
And then we can discuss it. I want to approve staff recommendation. Well, just a minute. Let me. I'm getting the same situation she was in. I want to adopt staff recommendation of disapproval
Disapproval.
Disapproval of the massing and.
Or would you approve it saying?
Yeah, well, no, let me back up. I will recommend approval with the consideration of reducing the mass of the outbuilding and the redesign of the roof form.
What about the last? Require administrative review of all?
Yes, and required administrative review of all the materials.
Okay. Okay, do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
A second.
Can we have some discussion? I worry about when we say just reduce it and redesign the roof. I don't know that we're giving staff enough guidance.
Okay.
I don't know how to do that now. I'm not telling Ann to amend her motion exactly. We've had this happen before, and we had a long discussion about what guidance we have to give, and I don't know if we ever really figured it out. But
Well, may I ask a question of staff? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think that is why we did recommend disapproval, because the conditions really are, to put any conditions on it is a whole new building again.
The what now?
To put conditions on it is really a new building, and that's why we did recommend disapproval. And, if you want to go that route, we would ask just for a little more clarification as to about how much massing are you talking about reducing?
Well, you're going back, I mean, we're talking about two different things here. You're talking about the roof form, and now we're talking about the mass.
Here's something about.
If we tell them they need to reduce the massing, I think we got to give them a number of square feet or a range or a percentage range or some guidance so they know whether it's 50 square feet or 500.
And my concern about that is that we're getting into debating specifics that are not before us. I don't think we can do that. And that's one reason that I have problems with what's in the small print, because it confuses me. I understand why you're doing it, but it confuses me. What you're really doing here is recommending disapproval. And so if we don't do that, then we're getting into these things that are in the small print here, and we're going to be getting into these long comments and observations about stuff we really don't know about because we don't have the specifics before us.
Yeah, I get confused. I think it puts pressure on staff to do something that they're not sure what to do.
What to do.
Fair and what we've asked them to do.
Well, if we were to disapprove it, they're going to want some guidance as what to come back, regardless of how we state the motion.
Yeah, I think when we disapprove something, that usually means you should have listened to staff the first time. I mean, generally, there's nuances, but I mean, I think when something comes before us that is the staff is disapproving, they've already had a bunch of conversations.
They have.
Well, then what is the difference of us saying reduce the mass? If they've had that conversation, staff has already made a recommendation as to what the mass should be reduced to.
So you're giving them opportunity to work it out administratively without having to reapply. If that's
if they've already had that conversation, if they've had the conversation with them and they've recommended this to the applicant, then the applicant should have some direction from staff already on what they think that reducing the mass means or should be. If we're going into what you say.
I guess I worry that what if staff now thinks 50 square feet is an appropriate reduction in massing when people who are voting for it think 500, one person thinks 300, one person thinks 20. I mean,
it kind of makes it a little ambiguous, I guess.
It's hard to understand.
If I could make a suggestion to the staff, I would really like for you not to do this anymore, because I thought it was an alternative when I first saw it.
That's how we've been dealing with it.
And I don't think it puts us in the position of having to really kind of tell the applicant kind of what to, give them guidelines as to what to do, or the staff, and I don't think we can do that.
Well,
I don't think we have the information to do that.
Well, I think Mitchell's a smart guy. I think he can handle whatever we might throw his way. He's done this before. He's pointed out in his presentation that there is, on consent, were garages that were in the neighborhood of 350 square foot less, but 2 stories, and you know, each case is individual, but Mitch is a smart guy. I think he can figure this out.
Well, you have the great benefit of knowing Mitch. What I would like to observe or ask about is, and I'm sorry, Mitch, you're a nice guy, I'm sure. What I'd like to ask, and maybe I should ask legal, if we disapprove this application, consistent with staff recommendation, does that not leave the applicant the opportunity to come back and get with staff and go through whatever you need to go through in your 30-day time limit without having to refile an application fee?
If you disapprove, then that'll be the decision, and there won't be a 30-day period. And he can go and take as long as he wants to come back with another project, and there will be no cost involved with that.
It's sort of the same thing we talked about.
It's the same thing you just did.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Right, that's correct.
None of our permits have any fees.
We have a motion and a second. Can I withdraw my motion?
You can.
Before we vote?
Yeah, before you vote.
Withdraw your motion. I'd like to withdraw my motion.
Okay. I withdraw my second. Okay.
So I have a motion.
If you're not finished.
Well, I was going to make another.
Oh, go ahead. No, you have the floor. I didn't know you had another
Real quick,
motion.
before we do a motion, yeah,
I just have a question for staff. You may have covered this in the report, but could you address again some of the previous outbuildings that we've approved in terms of massing? I'm just not necessarily seeing in this case, especially with the size of this lot, 60 feet wide, which is wider than a lot of the 50-foot lots that we often see, which this appears to be a 50-foot lot, this 3-car garage. And, this site section, unless it's misrepresented, which I don't think it is, but this site section just doesn't seem to be, certainly from the street, there's nothing bothersome about it. And I'm a little worried that we're saying we don't like what we approved before. We didn't, we were not, maybe we got carried away with this addition that we approved before, and so we're judging this still relatively large, but not, absurd outbuilding. I don't think absurd compared to some of the things we've approved before.
I think that's a very good point. And everything that we've been dealing with the last few months, in my opinion, we're in somewhat of a transition mode. And we may not be saying we don't agree with what our decision was on this edition, but I think overall, my sense is that overall additions that have been approved, garages that have been approved, may have been too big. And so where this one may have been approved without a thought a couple of years ago, again, it seems like we're in this transition mode. There's so much development happening. There was a desire to crack down on the massing of new construction, whatever it is. And based on how large this addition already is why we went the direction we did. And feel free to add more in there.
Well, I'm coming from way back when outbuildings weren't even approved, and that we've allowed them, and they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they're becoming homes, and they're not supposed to be homes. They're not supposed to be livable spaces. They're supposed to be outbuildings. And I guess I'm too old and go too far back, remembering where it started. And I think, and I'm big on not setting a precedent. And I just feel like that we've got a lot of places, especially in this area, where there are large lots and there are large additions, and we're going to keep having them and having them and having them. And I guess my history goes back too far to feel comfortable with them.
Could I have my question answered, I guess, about the size of outbuildings that have been?
Well, it's a very complex issue, certainly, and the answer is probably very complex as well. Yes. Okay. So one of the examples presented as a comparable that was approved on the consent agenda today has a 699 square foot footprint. It's a one-story garage. I don't think that that's a comparable or a good comparison. That is something that would have been approved at staff level, but it was part of infill. One of the others is a two-story garage, but it's subordinate to the four-square house to which it's an accessory building. As a larger, bigger picture, staff reviewed this application in the context of an accessory building to a craftsman bungalow, and the accessory building is not subordinate to the historic house. It's taller, yes, the grade drops, but the footprint is larger than the historic house. It's larger than my historic house. The existence of other large outbuildings throughout this neighborhood and others. Again, that's a complex issue. There are a lot of four-square houses on Richland Avenue that have two-story garages, and the two-story in that situation is compatible too, because it's, you have a two-story house in front of it. There might be other examples of large accessory buildings in this neighborhood that were built before the overlay, or that were approved since the overlay, but don't stand as good examples of things that ought to be repeated. So
I agree with you. It's a complex answer. Did you say, though, that the footprint of this building is larger than the original bungalow?
Conditioned space, yes. That's not including the porch or porte cochere. The footprint.
Which is, I'm just looking at the site plan. It's hard to believe that the footprint of the, I mean, I don't, well, it looks like the original footprint went back to, on the site plan, where the 29'4" number is, right? Is that your understanding?
On the
on the site plan, where the addition steps back as we require it.
Could you say that again?
Sorry, on the site plan that was submitted, about halfway back, the existing, or the structure that's there now, there's a number 29.4. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but that line that runs across there, isn't that the back of the original home?
Yes.
And the front of the original home, including the porch, the footprint is up where the front setback is there.
Including the porch, yes.
Right. So it looks like the outbuilding on this drawing is about half the size of the existing building, or the original footprint of the bungalow. So
I think it depends whether we're counting all space or conditioned space. I think from a conditioned space perspective, it's the new.
From a design perspective, shouldn't we be looking at the entire footprint?
Maybe not the front porch, maybe not a porte cochere, stuff like that. But yeah, I think the form is ultimately the most important thing. But when I come back to this, it's big. It's 1,800 square feet. It's a house. Now, I mean, it's a small house by today's standards, but it's big. And there's already a really big house on there. And I'm not saying you can't have anything.
It sounds like we're discriminating against people with really big houses.
No, I'm not saying you can't have anything back there. It's just, at some point, I think staff made a good observation. At some point, there was twice as much new construction as there is the original form, and then at some point there's a line. I'm not saying this is it. I don't know where that line is, but it's in especially Belmont Hillsborough and Richland West End, we get more because there's different demographics and some bigger lots. We're getting some of these gigantic structures that I think defy some of the expectations about what people think they were getting when they put in a conservation overlay.
May we recommend? I just want to provide some thoughts because I hear the commission kind of thinking about how best to approach it. And I want to offer this as a suggestion. The guidelines say that a new garage or storage building should reflect the character of the period of the house to which the outbuilding will be related. The outbuilding should be compatible by not contrasting greatly with surrounding historic outbuildings in terms of height, scale, roof shape, materials, texture, and details. The surrounding outbuildings are key to your analysis in this case, because that's what the guidelines are referring to. Then on the second page of the staff report, it says that the outbuilding should be situated on a lot as historically typical for surrounding outbuildings. Two things. One, just wanted to remind you what the guidelines for determining what's appropriate for the outbuildings say, but also I didn't want you to go too far down. It sounded like there's some discussion about whether we should be looking at the whole house, whether we should be looking at the historic house, whether we should be looking at the addition. And I think you have to look at the house as a whole and how you would evaluate it as it is now. And I think also that this application has to kind of stand on its own as an outbuilding. In other words, I don't know that we can go into whether we would have approved it if it had been submitted as with the outbuilding and the addition at the same time. I don't know that that can be a part of your analysis because that's not actually what's before you. What's before you is you have a house that actually includes an addition, and with comparison to that house that exists as it exists now, is that outbuilding appropriate under your review? And if you think that it is appropriate, then you should grant it. If you think that it's not appropriate, then you shouldn't grant it. Likewise with the guideline itself, if you think it's appropriate when comparing it to other outbuildings in the area, if you think it's appropriate, you should grant it. If you think it's inappropriate based on the other outbuildings in the area, you should not grant it. So I just wanted to give some feedback because I hear the discussion going different ways. So
well,
okay, thank you.
You're saying, though, that we're not should not be considering the historic building, but the historic building plus the addition as what is now being considered sort of the original structure.
Well, I don't know that we can make a differentiation in terms of what's the original structure as compared to the outbuilding application that's before you right now. Well, because you've got to make a determination based on scale and massing, but I think this probably will kind of get to your question, and that is the Secretary of Interior standards. It says new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy the historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. But I think that's talking about when you looked at, let me say it, let me break it, do it this way. When you looked at the addition, you were looking at it in an effort not to destroy the character of the property. And you approved that addition with that in mind, assuming. Likewise, when you look at this outbuilding, given the character, the current character of this property, addition and all, whether you would destroy any of the historic, does it detract from the historic nature of the home? I think it's the question for you to decide, or one of the questions for you to decide.
So what I'm hearing is there's sort of two things to look at. One is look at the whole house versus the outbuilding, decide whether it's subordinate and all those things. That analysis is, we do that a lot. But then you also need to look at outbuildings in the vicinity.
That's correct.
And it would sort of need to be consistent or not contrast greatly with both.
Right.
In order to be approved.
Well said.
So we have two things we need to look at, those two things that you just outlined.
Would it be inappropriate to make a motion to approve the rear setback variance and separate that issue now?
Well, we could, but maybe we can. I think we could, but maybe we can just, it's not really it's not one of the different things they pulled out. Let's see if we can just hash this out so we don't have to go to sleep here.
I've got a motion that isn't a disapproval motion. If we can try that one and see where.
Let's throw it out there.
Here's where I'm coming at it now. Susan's analysis was very helpful because I think personally I had lost sight of the language that is important, that the outbuilding should be compatible by not contrasting greatly with surrounding historic outbuildings. And I think we often get caught up on the relation between the historic home and the outbuilding and it being subordinate and saying, there you go. I think in terms of it being subordinate to what is now the existing home and the downgrade, I think it's fine. I'm not that part. I think it passes. I think it doesn't work so well when you consider, as staff says here, that the outbuildings in the average in the vicinity is 737 and the largest is 920. So with that in mind, my motion is going to be to approve the application with the condition, with the following conditions. One is to reduce the setback to 10 feet, that staff administratively review all materials, and that the massing of the square footage of the outbuilding, the massing, be reduced in staff's opinion to be consistent with somewhere in the range of 900 square feet. It's the higher end of what is in the vicinity, recognizing that this is a big house, so it should have a bigger outbuilding.
Since you hit the other three bullets, did you have anything about the roof form?
The roof form didn't bother me.
Although the roof form will be affected by the 900.
Yeah, that's sort of back after I go on my thing. When Ann makes a motion like that, then I agree. It's not that easy.
Okay.
But let me add to the motion that in reducing the massing, the roof form has to be approved by staff as well.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. No, go ahead.
So I meant, when I said 900 square feet, I meant the footprint, not total square footage.
900 square foot footprint.
Right, I think that's the way the staff expressed it.
Is the motion, it sounded like kind of in the range of 900 feet?
Let me
footprint.
Let me clarify that. By the range of 900 feet, I meant 850 to 950.
The maximum.
Footprint. Square feet.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion.
And so that's about, how big is the current footprint, 1,200?
Yeah.
Is that right?
1,250.
So that's about a third or 2/3 the size of it currently. So to some degree, it's similar to the last case in that it's going to be a very different building, that we aren't, by approving it, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity.
Well, but we don't always approve. I mean, they do that a lot on staff level anyway.
I guess I'm trying to give them something to walk away with today, because I want to acknowledge that it's an outbuilding and it's not going to be seen from the street. It's downgrade. There's an alley with a big railroad berm. It really is concealed. I just have issues with setting a precedent for something so large, so I just want to reduce it some, acknowledging all the mitigating factors that it has, that it should be very much on the higher range of what's in the vicinity.
Okay. Well, I say we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Okay. Motion carries.
I think that's about it, but I did want to remind you that next month we'll need to vote on new officers, the chair and vice chair.
Excuse me. And we have training next week? Next month, training?
I didn't even realize it shows the width of the historic house. So that's what that was. And if we don't change the orientation of the roof and that we, and if if we don't change the orientation of the roof,
Sean.